the Leper King. Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction. So don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 1, A Second Life in a Broken Body. The screech of tires and the shattering of glass were the last things Ethan Caldwell remembered. He had been crossing the street, earbuds blasting his favorite playlist, when the delivery truck barreled through the intersection. There was no time to react, just a blinding flash of pain, then darkness. He expected oblivion. Maybe a tunnel of light or some cosmic judgment. Instead, there was a jolt, like waking from a dream, and a flood of sensations that weren't his own. His skin burned and itched beneath heavy bandages. His limbs felt weak, as if they belonged to someone else. The air was thick with the scent of incense and sweat, and voices, unfamiliar, speaking in a language he vaguely recognized, murmured around him. Ethan tried to open his eyes, but they were heavy, crusted shut. Panic surged. Was he in a hospital? No, the voices weren't speaking English. They were French? No, not quite. Old French, maybe, mixed with something else. He forced his eyes open, wincing at the dim light filtering through a stone window. The room was small, its walls rough-hewn stone, draped with tapestries depicting crosses and lions. A man in a long robe, his face shadowed by a hood, leaned over him, muttering what sounded like a prayer. "Where am I?" Ethan croaked, his voice raspy, unfamiliar. The words came out wrong, not in English but in a tongue he shouldn't know. His heart pounded. This wasn't right. He wasn't himself. The hooded man paused, his eyes widening. "My lord, you speak," he said in that same strange language, which Ethan somehow understood. "Praise be to God, you are awake, lord?" Ethan's mind reeled. He tried to sit up, but his body protested, every joint aching. His hands, wrapped in linen bandages, trembled as he raised them to his face. Beneath the wrappings, his skin felt rough, scarred, wrong. He caught a glimpse of his reflection in a polished bronze tray nearby. The face staring back wasn't his. It was gaunt, pale, partially covered by a silver mask that hid the left side. The visible eye was blue, not Ethan's brown, and the hair was a thin, pale blonde. "Who am I?" he whispered, dread coiling in his gut. The hooded man knelt. "You are Baldwin, IV of your name, King of Jerusalem, defender of the holy city. God has spared you once more." Ethan's breath caught. Baldwin IV. The name hit him like a freight train. He'd read about him in a history class, the young king of Jerusalem during the Crusades, struck by leprosy, ruling a kingdom on the brink of war. But this was impossible. He was Ethan, a 23-year-old barista from Chicago, not a medieval king. Had he been reincarnated? Transmigrated? Was this some twisted afterlife? "What year is it?" he asked, his voice shaking. The man frowned, as if the question puzzled him. "It is the year of our Lord 1177, my king." Ethan's mind spun. 1177. Jerusalem. The Crusades. Saladin. He wasn't just in another body, he was in another time. He tried to piece it together. He died, that much was clear. But how had he ended up here, in the body of a king? And why Baldwin IV, of all people? The Leper King, whose body was ravaged by disease, whose reign was a constant struggle against both illness and enemies. He glanced around the room. A few men stood near the door, clad in chainmail and tunics emblazoned with crosses. Knights. Another figure, a woman in a veiled headdress, hovered nearby, holding a bowl of water and a cloth. They all watched him with a mix of awe and concern. "My lord, you must rest," the hooded man said. "Likely a physician or priest. The fever has broken, but your strength is not yet returned." Ethan, Baldwin, he supposed, nodded weakly, his mind racing. He needed answers, but he couldn't just blurt out that he wasn't the real Baldwin. They'd think he was mad, or worse, possessed. He had to play the part, at least until he understood what was happening. "Leave me," he said, mimicking the imperious tone he imagined a king might use. "I need time to think." The physician hesitated, then bowed. "As you command, sire." He gestured to the others, and they filed out, leaving Ethan alone in the stone chamber. He lay back, staring at the vaulted ceiling. His body ached, every movement a reminder of the disease that plagued Baldwin. Leprosy. He'd read about it, disfiguring, debilitating, a death sentence in this era. Yet Baldwin had ruled despite it, holding together a fractious kingdom against Saladin's armies. Ethan, though, was no king. He was a nobody, scraped by in a dead-end job, his biggest achievement beating the final boss in Elden Ring. How was he supposed to survive this? He closed his eyes, trying to recall everything he knew about Baldwin IV. Crowned at 13, dead by 24, a brilliant tactician despite his illness. The Battle of Montgisard was coming up soon, wasn't it? 1177. Baldwin's greatest victory, where he'd crushed Saladin's army against all odds. If Ethan was stuck here, he'd have to face that battle. And Saladin. And the politics of a kingdom where half the nobles were probably scheming against him. A knock at the door snapped him out of his thoughts. "Enter," he said, hoping he sounded regal. A man stepped in, tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered but handsome, with a short beard and a cross pendant around his neck. He wore a surcoat with a red cross, a Templar. Ethan realized, his limited historical knowledge kicking in. "Sire," the man said, bowing. "I am Raymond of Tripoli, your regent. The court awaits your command. There is news from Ascalon. Saladin's forces are moving." Ethan's stomach dropped. Raymond of Tripoli. A major player in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and not always a loyal one, from what he remembered. And Saladin was already on the move? He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready for any of this. "Tell me everything," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "I need to know the state of the kingdom." Raymond's eyes narrowed slightly, as if sensing something off, but he nodded. "Of course, my king." As Raymond began to speak, detailing troop numbers, alliances, and the looming threat of Saladin's army, Ethan's mind raced. He was no longer Ethan Caldwell. He was Baldwin IV, king of Jerusalem, and history was waiting for him to act. Whether this was a second chance or a cosmic joke, he had to survive, disease, war, and all. Chapter 2, A King's Burden in a Modern Mind. The Great Hall of the Palace in Jerusalem was a far cry from the sterile coffee shop Ethan had spent his days in. Stone walls soared to vaulted ceiling, adorned with banners bearing crosses and a Lion of Judah. Torches flickered, casting shadows over the assembled nobles, knights, and clergy who filled the room. Their eyes were fixed on him, Baldwin IV, their king, seated on a cushioned throne that did little to ease the ache in his bandaged limbs. Ethan's heart thudded beneath the heavy robes and the silver mask that hid half his face. He felt like an imposter in a costume, playing a role he barely understood. Raymond of Tripoli stood to his right, his expression unreadable as he recounted the latest reports. "Saladin's forces have been sighted near Ascalon," he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the court. "Our scouts estimate 10,000 men, perhaps more. They move with purpose, likely aiming to test our defenses before striking Jerusalem itself." The nobles stirred, some whispering, others gripping the hilts of their swords. Ethan's mind raced. 10,000 men. He'd read about Saladin's campaigns. The Ayyubid Sultan was a military genius, uniting Muslim forces against the Crusader states. The Battle of Montgisard was coming, a victory that would cement Baldwin's legend. But Ethan wasn't Baldwin. He was a 23-year-old with no military experience, unless you counted strategy games. Could he pull off a miracle like Montgisard? He cleared his throat, hoping his voice wouldn't betray his panic. "What are our forces?" he asked, the words coming out in that unfamiliar old French. He was still unnerved by how naturally he spoke it, as if Baldwin's memories lingered in his body, guiding his tongue. Raymond raised an eyebrow, perhaps surprised by the question. "We have 500 knights, sire, and perhaps 3,000 foot soldiers, including levies from the baronies. The Templars and Hospitallers can bolster our numbers, but we are sorely outnumbered." Ethan nodded, trying to look thoughtful while his mind screamed. 500 knights against 10,000? The odds were insane. He remembered Montgisard from his history class. Baldwin had won with a fraction of Saladin's numbers, relying on speed, terrain, and sheer audacity. But that was Baldwin, not Ethan. He needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to survive this. His gaze drifted to his hands, wrapped in linen to hide the lesions of leprosy. The disease was another enemy, one that gnawed at his body every moment. In the 12th century, leprosy was a death sentence, treated with prayers and primitive remedies. But Ethan wasn't from the 12th century. He was from 2025, a world of antibiotics, immunotherapy, and medical research. Could he use that knowledge to fight this? To cure himself, sire? Raymond's voice cut through his thoughts. The court was waiting for his response. Ethan straightened, aware of every eye on him. "We will prepare to meet Saladin," he said, hoping he sounded decisive. "Send word to the Templars and Hospitallers. I want their full support. And, gather our best physicians. I wish to discuss my health." A murmur rippled through the court. The mention of his health was bold. Everyone knew the king's condition was a delicate subject, rarely spoken of openly. Raymond's eyes narrowed slightly, but he bowed. "As you command, my lord." The meeting continued, with nobles debating supply lines and fortifications. Ethan listened, nodding when it seemed appropriate. But his mind was elsewhere. Leprosy. In his time, it was called Hansen's disease, caused by Mycobacterium leprae. It was treatable with multi-drug therapy, dapsone, rifampicin, clofazimine. None of those existed here. But Ethan wasn't a doctor, he was a barrister with a high school biology class and a Wikipedia-level understanding of medicine. Still, he knew the basics. Bacteria, not curses, caused this. Cleanliness, diet, and maybe some herbs could slow its progress. If he could recreate even a crude antibiotic, he shook his head, catching himself. Antibiotics were centuries away. But there were other possibilities. He'd read about medieval medicine. Herbs like garlic and turmeric had antibacterial properties. Honey was used as a wound dressing, wasn't it? Maybe he could experiment, find something to manage the symptoms, buy himself time. The real Baldwin had died at 24, and Ethan was in his body now, probably 16 or 17. He had years to work with. If he could survive the wars and the court. As the meeting adjourned, Ethan gestured for the physician from the previous day to approach. The man, introduced as Brother Gerard, was a hospitaller with a lined face and a calm demeanor. "You summoned me, sire?" he asked, bowing. Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Tell me about my condition. What treatments are used?" Gerard hesitated, his eyes flickering with unease. "My lord, your affliction is a trial from God. We apply salves of aloe and myrrh to soothe the skin, and you are bathed in holy water blessed by the patriarch. Prayer and fasting are your greatest allies." Ethan suppressed a groan. Prayer wasn't going to kill bacteria. What about herbs? Medicines from the East? I've heard of physicians in Damascus and Baghdad with knowledge beyond ours. Gerard's brow furrowed. "The Saracens have their ways, sire, but their remedies are suspect, tainted by their faith. We trust in Christian healing." Ethan bit back a retort. He wasn't about to argue theology with a 12th century monk. "Bring me texts," he said instead. "Anything you have on medicine, Christian, Saracen, or otherwise. I want to understand every option." Gerard looked skeptical but nodded. "I will see what can be found, my lord." As the physician left, Ethan leaned back, his bandaged hands gripping the throne's arms. He felt the weight of the crown, metaphorical, since he wasn't wearing one, pressing down on him. Saladin was coming. The court was watching. And his body was a ticking time bomb. He needed to be Baldwin, the king, but he also needed to be Ethan, the guy who'd Googled how to treat infections when he got a bad cut. Could he bridge those worlds? Could he change history, not just for Jerusalem but for himself tonight? He muttered to himself. "I start researching." A young squire approached, bowing. "Sire, the Lady Sibylla requests an audience." Ethan froze. Sibylla. Baldwin's sister, a key figure in the kingdom's politics. Another challenge. "Send her in," he said, bracing himself. He had a war to fight, a body to save, and a kingdom to rule. And somehow, he'd have to do it all without losing himself. Chapter 3, A Sister's Ambition and a King's Memories. The heavy oak door creaked open, and a woman stepped into the chamber, her presence commanding despite the simplicity of her attire. Sibylla, Princess of Jerusalem, was younger than Ethan expected, perhaps 18, with sharp green eyes and auburn hair braided beneath a delicate veil. Her expression was a mix of concern and calculation, as if she were assessing a chessboard rather than her ailing brother. Ethan, still adjusting to the weight of Baldwin's bandaged body and silver mask, straightened on the throne-like chair, hoping he looked more kingly than he felt. "Sire," Sibylla said, her voice soft but deliberate as she dipped into a curtsy. "I am relieved to see you awake." The court whispers of miracles. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't know Sibylla, not personally, only from history books. She was Baldwin's older sister, ambitious, destined to play a pivotal role in the kingdom's future. But was she an ally or a threat? He had no idea how Baldwin had interacted with her, and one wrong word could expose him as an impostor. "Thank you, Sibylla," he said, keeping his tone neutral, the old French flowing unnaturally from his lips. "Your presence is comforting. What brings you here?" Her eyes flickered, perhaps catching the hesitation in his voice. "I wish to see you myself, brother. Your illness has kept you from court too long, and the nobles grow restless. Raymond of Tripoli speaks boldly in your absence, and there are whispers of alliances forming without your consent." Ethan's stomach churned. Politics. Of course. Raymond, the regent, had already struck him as a man with his own agenda. Now Sibylla was hinting at factionalism in the court, nobles scheming while the kingdom faced Saladin's army. He needed to tread carefully. "What do you suggest?" he asked, hoping to draw her out. Sibylla stepped closer, her voice lowering. "You must show strength, Baldwin. Appear before the court, rally the knights. Saladin's shadow looms, and a weak king invites betrayal. I can help you, as I always have." The words were warm, but Ethan sensed an edge. Was she offering support or positioning herself to control him? He remembered Sibylla's historical reputation, loyal to her brother but fiercely ambitious for her own son's claim to the throne. He nodded slowly. "I will address the court soon. But I need your counsel, sister." "Who can I trust?" She smiled, a calculated curve of her lips. "Trust is a rare coin in Jerusalem. The Templars are loyal to the cross, but their zeal blinds them. The Hospitallers serve, but their eyes are on their own power. Raymond seeks influence, but he is no traitor, yet. For now, trust me, brother. I am your blood." Ethan wasn't convinced, but he forced a smile, the mask hiding his uncertainty. "I will consider your words." "Thank you, Sibylla." She inclined her head and withdrew, leaving Ethan alone with his racing thoughts. He had to navigate this snake pit of a court while his body crumbled under leprosy. Speaking of which, he needed to act on his medical ideas before the disease worsened. He rang a small bell on the table beside him, summoning Brother Gerard. The Hospitaller physician Gerard entered, carrying a bundle of parchment scrolls. "As you requested, sire, I have brought texts on healing, some from our own monasteries, others from Saracen merchants in Acre. I must caution you, their methods are unorthodox." Ethan leaned forward, ignoring the ache in his joints. "Show me." Gerard unrolled a scroll, its script a mix of Latin and Arabic. "This speaks of herbs, garlic, myrrh, and a root called turmeric, used by the Saracens to cleanse wounds. Another text mentions honey as a salve to prevent corruption of the flesh." Ethan's pulse quickened. He'd been right, medieval medicine wasn't entirely useless. Garlic and turmeric had antibacterial properties, and honey was a natural antiseptic. In his time, Hansen's disease was treated with specific antibiotics, but those were impossible here. Still, he could work with this. "Can we obtain these? Garlic, turmeric, honey? And what about willow bark? It reduces pain and fever." Gerard blinked, clearly surprised by the king's knowledge. "Willow bark is known to us, sire, used for aches. Turmeric is rarer, but traders from the east bring it. I can procure these, though I do not understand how they might aid your affliction." "It's worth trying," Ethan said firmly. "Mix garlic and turmeric into paste, apply it to my lesions daily. Use honey on any open sores. And brew willow bark tea for the pain. I want reports on any changes." Gerard hesitated, likely torn between skepticism and duty. "As you command, my lord. But you must not neglect prayer." "God's will." "God gave us minds to use," Ethan interrupted, then softened his tone. "I trust in his guidance, but I must explore every path." Gerard bowed and left to gather the supplies, leaving Ethan to ponder his next steps. He wasn't just fighting leprosy, he was fighting time. The disease would progress, and even if he slowed it, he needed a long-term plan. He recalled reading about early attempts at isolating bacteria in the 19th century, far beyond this era's capabilities. But maybe he could experiment with fermentation or mold, like the accidental discovery of penicillin. It was a long shot, but he had to try something. As he sat, staring at the flickering torchlight, a sudden pain lanced through his skull. He gasped, clutching his head as images and voices flooded his mind, memories that weren't his. A boy, crowned at 13, standing before a cheering court. A battlefield, knights charging under a blazing sun, the clash of steel and the cry of Jerusalem. A map of the kingdom, its fortresses and trade routes etched in perfect detail. Strategies, flanking maneuvers, feigned retreats, the use of terrain to counter larger armies. Baldwin's memories, his knowledge, his life. Ethan staggered, gripping the chair to steady himself. It was as if a dam had burst, pouring the Leper King's mind into his own. He saw Montgisard, not as a history lesson, but as Baldwin had planned it, luring Saladin's forces into a narrow valley, using the Templars' heavy cavalry to break their lines, exploiting the enemy's overconfidence. He knew the strengths of every castle, the loyalties of every baron, the weaknesses of Saladin's supply lines. The pain subsided, leaving Ethan breathless. He wasn't just Ethan anymore. He was Baldwin, too, or at least, he had Baldwin's military genius, his understanding of this world. For the first time since waking in this body, he felt a spark of hope. He could do this. He could fight Saladin, outmaneuver the court, maybe even find a way to survive the leprosy. But the weight of those memories brought a new fear. Baldwin's life was one of duty, sacrifice, and pain. Could Ethan bear that burden? And what did it mean that Baldwin's mind had merged with his own? Was he still himself, or was he becoming someone else? He pushed the thought aside. For now, he had a sister to manage, a war to prepare for, and a disease to fight. With Baldwin's strategies and Ethan's modern knowledge, he might just pull it off, sire? A squire's voice broke his reverie. The court awaits your presence. Ethan stood, his bandaged hands steady despite the ache. Led the way, he said, his voice carrying a new confidence. He was Baldwin IV, King of Jerusalem, and he was ready to fight. Chapter 4, A King's Mask and a Modern Hope. The great hall of Jerusalem's palace thrummed with anticipation, a sea of nobles, knights, and clergy packed shoulder to shoulder. Their eyes followed Ethan, Baldwin IV, as he entered, each step a deliberate effort to mask the weakness in his leprosy-ravaged body. The silver mask covering half his face gleamed in the torchlight, a symbol of both his authority and his affliction. Ethan's heart pounded, but Baldwin's memories, now fused with his own, steadied him. He knew this hall, these faces, the weight of their expectations. He was their king, and today, he had to prove it. He ascended the dais, settling onto the throne with as much grace as his aching limbs allowed. The court fell silent, waiting. Ethan scanned the crowd. Raymond of Tripoli, his regent, stood with a guarded expression. The Grand Master of the Templars, Odo de Saint-Amand, radiated zeal, and Sibylla, his sister, watched from the side, her green eyes unreadable. Ethan drew a breath, letting Baldwin's instincts guide his words. Lords and knights of Jerusalem, he began, his voice carrying despite its rasp, Saladin marches on our lands. His army threatens Ascalon, and with it, our kingdom's heart. We will not yield. I call upon every man here to prepare for war. The holy city will stand. A murmur of approval rippled through the hall, though Ethan caught skeptical glances among the barons. Baldwin's memories whispered their names and motives: Jocelyn de Courtenay, ambitious and untrustworthy; Balian of Ibelin, loyal but cautious. Ethan pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on the moment. Raymond, report on our preparations, he commanded. Raymond stepped forward, detailing the mustering of knights and levies. We have rallied 400 knights and 2,000 foot soldiers, sire. The Templars pledge 80 knights, the Hospitallers 60. We fortify Ascalon, but Saladin's numbers dwarf ours. Ethan nodded, Baldwin's strategic knowledge flooding his mind. Montchesard was near, a battle where Baldwin had historically outmaneuvered Saladin. The memory was vivid, a narrow valley, a sudden charge, exploiting the enemy's overextended lines. Send scouts to the valley near Montchesard, Ethan said, surprising himself with the clarity of the order. I want reports on the terrain and Saladin's movements. We will choose our ground. Raymond's eyes widened slightly, but he bowed. At once, my lord. As the court dispersed into discussions of logistics, Ethan's thoughts turned inward. The military plans felt natural, thanks to Baldwin's memories, but his body was another matter. The leprosy gnawed at him, a constant reminder of his mortality. He'd instructed Brother Gerard to prepare the herbal remedies, garlic, turmeric, and honey, but he needed to see progress soon. If he was to lead an army, he couldn't afford to collapse mid-campaign. Later, in his private chambers, Brother Gerard arrived with a wooden tray bearing a clay bowl of pungent paste and a cup of steaming liquid. As you commanded, sire, he said, setting the tray down. A paste of garlic and turmeric, mixed with olive oil, and a tea of willow bark. I have also acquired honey from the Judean hills, pure and untainted. Ethan inspected the paste, its sharp smell stinging his nose. In his time, he'd read about turmeric's anti-inflammatory and antibacterial properties, and garlic's ability to fight infections. It wasn't dapsone or rifampicin, but it was a start. Apply the paste to my arms, he said, unwrapping the linen bandages to reveal the scarred, discolored skin beneath. The sight made his stomach turn, but he forced himself to stay composed. Gerard hesitated, his face paling at the extent of the lesions. Sire, this is unconventional. Do it, Ethan said firmly, channeling Baldwin's authority. And note any changes, redness, swelling, anything. Gerard nodded, spreading the paste with a wooden spatula. The cool mixture soothed the burning skin, though Ethan couldn't tell if it was placebo or progress. He sipped the willow bark tea, its bitter taste wrinkling his nose. Aspirin's ancestor, he thought, salicin, a natural painkiller. If it reduced his fever and joint pain, he could focus on the war. Tell me about Saracen medicine, Ethan said as Gerard worked. You mentioned texts from Damascus. What do they say about skin diseases? Gerard frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the topic. They speak of cleansing the body with herbs and baths, sire. Some claim a plant called neem purifies the blood. Others use oils distilled from frankincense to heal sores. But these are heathen practices, and I cannot vouch for their efficacy. Ethan's mind raced. Neem? He'd heard of it, an Indian plant with antimicrobial properties. Frankincense might have anti-inflammatory effects. These were leads, fragments of a puzzle he could piece together with his modern knowledge. Find neem, he ordered. And frankincense oil. I want to test them. Gerard bowed, though his expression suggested he thought the king was grasping at straws. I will inquire with the merchants, sire. As Gerard left, Ethan leaned back, exhaustion creeping in. The court appearance had drained him, and the herbal treatments were a gamble. He needed time to experiment, time to strengthen his body, time to prepare for Saladin. Baldwin's memories gave him a military edge, but they also carried a weight, the king's relentless drive, his acceptance of a short, painful life. Ethan wasn't ready to embrace that fate. He wanted to live, not just as Baldwin but as himself. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Balian of Ibelin entered, his weathered face serious but kind. Sire, the scouts have been dispatched to Montgisard. I come to offer my sword and counsel. The barons are uneasy, and Sibylla's whispers do not help. You must bind them to you. Ethan nodded, grateful for Balian's straightforwardness. Baldwin's memories confirmed his loyalty, a rare commodity. Thank you, Balian. I'll need you at my side. Prepare the knights for a march. We'll face Saladin soon. Balian bowed and left, leaving Ethan to stare at the flickering candle on his table. The paste on his arms tingled, a faint hope in a sea of uncertainty. He closed his eyes, picturing the battlefield at Montgisard, the strategies now as clear as his own memories. He could win this battle. He could survive this body. But first, he had to keep the court in line and his disease at bay. Tomorrow, he'd test the neem and frankincense. Tomorrow, he'd rally the kingdom. Tonight, he was a king with two minds, fighting for a future that history said he couldn't have. Chapter 5, Seeds of Progress and Shadows of War. The morning sun filtered through the narrow windows of Baldwin's chambers, casting golden streaks across the stone floor. Ethan sat at a wooden table, his bandaged hands steadier than they'd been in days. The garlic turmeric paste and honey salves, applied diligently by brother Gerard, had begun to show results. The lesions on his arms were less inflamed, the raw edges of his sores slightly less angry. The willow bark tea dulled the constant ache in his joints, giving him a clarity he hadn't felt since waking in this body. It wasn't a cure. Ethan knew leprosy required multi-drug therapy far beyond this era's reach, but it was progress. For the first time, he dared to hope he could slow the disease's march. Brother Gerard entered, carrying a small vial of amber liquid and a bundle of dried leaves. Sire, I have acquired frankincense oil and neem leaves, as you requested, he said, setting them down. The merchants in Acre drove a hard bargain, but they swear by the neem's purifying qualities. Ethan nodded, his mind already racing. Neem was promising. Its antibacterial and antifungal properties could complement the turmeric and garlic. The frankincense oil might reduce inflammation further. Crush the neem leaves into paste with a turmeric mixture, he instructed. Mix a few drops of frankincense oil into it. Apply it twice daily, and keep a record of any changes. Gerard's brow furrowed, but he no longer questioned the king's orders. As you command, my lord. The court speaks of your vigor today. Your presence yesterday inspired many. Ethan allowed a small smile, hidden by his silver mask. His appearance before the court had quieted some of the whispers, though he knew Sibylla and Raymond were still maneuvering. Baldwin's memories, now fully integrated, gave him an edge. He could anticipate their moves, read their intentions. But military strategy alone wouldn't secure the kingdom. Saladin's army was closing in, and Jerusalem's resources were stretched thin. Ethan needed more than knights and prayers. He needed innovation. As Gerard applied the new paste, Ethan's thoughts drifted to his old life. He wasn't an engineer or a scientist, just a barrister with a knack for trivia and a few history podcasts under his belt. but he knew enough about the modern world to recognize the gaps in this one. The 12th century lacks so much: sanitation, efficient agriculture, basic mechanics. Could he bridge that gap? Introduce technologies that were simple yet transformative, without arousing suspicion. He started small, picturing the kingdom's needs. Jerusalem relied on trade and agriculture, but its fields were parched, and its sieges were brutal. Irrigation could boost crop yields. Simple ditches or aqueducts, like those the Romans had built, were within reach. He'd read about medieval water wheels. Could he refine them for grinding grain or even powering basic tools? And for war, the Crusaders' armor and weapons were effective but heavy. Could he introduce lighter crossbow designs or better siege equipment, like counterweight trebuchets? These were centuries away historically, but with Baldwin's authority, he could nudge the kingdom toward them. "Gerard," Ethan said, testing the waters, "how do our farmers water their fields?" The physician blinked, caught off guard. "With buckets from wells or rivers, sire. In dry seasons, they pray for rain." Ethan nodded, his mind sketching a plan. "Summon the master of the royal works. I want to discuss channels to bring water to the fields." Like the Romans did. Gerard's eyes widened, but he bowed. "I will fetch him, my lord." As Gerard left, a squire announced the arrival of Baldwin of Ibelin. Ethan straightened, grateful for a familiar ally. Baldwin entered, his surcoat dusty from the road, his expression grim but resolute. "Sire, the scouts have returned from Montgisard. Saladin's army is encamped near the valley, overconfident in their numbers. The terrain favors us, as you predicted." Ethan's heart quickened. Baldwin's memories painted the scene: a narrow valley, perfect for funneling Saladin's forces into a trap. "Good," he said, his voice steady with the king's instincts. "Muster the knights and levies. We march for Montgisard in 2 days. The Templars will lead the charge, with the Hospitallers on the flanks." Baldwin nodded, admiration in his eyes. "Your father would be proud, sire." "This is the Baldwin who held court at 13." Ethan forced a smile, the mask hiding his unease. He wasn't Baldwin, not entirely, but the memories made it hard to draw the line. He shifted the conversation to his new ideas. "Baldwin, our kingdom is strong, but it could be stronger. What if we built machines to grind grain faster? Or devices to hurl stones farther in sieges?" Baldwin frowned, intrigued but cautious. "Such things exist, sire, mills and mangonels, but they are costly and slow to build." "Have you a new design in mind?" Ethan hesitated. He couldn't exactly sketch a blueprint, but he could describe concepts. "Imagine a mill powered by a river, not men. Or a siege engine that uses weights, not ropes, to throw stones twice as far. I'll speak with a master of works to design them." Baldwin's eyes lit up. "If such things are possible, they could change our fortunes. But the barons will need convincing, and the church may call it unnatural." Ethan nodded, expecting resistance. He'd have to frame these innovations as divine inspiration, not modern knowledge. "I'll handle the court," he said. "Focus on the march to Montgisard." As Baldwin left, Ethan turned to the table, where a parchment map of the kingdom lay spread out. Baldwin's memories guided his finger to Montgisard, tracing the valley's contours. He could win this battle, he knew it now, with a certainty that wasn't his own. But victory on the battlefield wouldn't solve everything. The kingdom needed food, water, and defenses to survive the long term. And he needed to survive his leprosy. The neem paste tingled on his skin, a reminder of his gamble. If he could stabilize his health and introduce even 1 or 2 technologies, irrigation, improved mills, better siege weapons, he could strengthen Jerusalem against Saladin and the court schemers. But time was short, and every step risked exposing him as something other than Baldwin. A knock at the door broke his reverie. Sibylla entered, unannounced, her expression a mix of concern and calculation. "Brother, you push yourself too hard," she said, gliding closer. "The court speaks of your plans: war, machines, medicines. Some call it madness." Ethan met her gaze, Baldwin's memories warning him of her ambition. "Let them talk," he said coolly. "Jerusalem will stand, and I will see it thrive." Sibylla's smile was tight. "Of course, my king. But take care. A king's strength is in his allies, not just his dreams." She left, her words lingering like a threat. Ethan clenched his bandaged fist. He had a battle to win, a kingdom to innovate, and a body to save. With Baldwin's strategies and his own modern ideas, he'd fight on all fronts. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows across the map, he wondered how long he could wear the mask of a king before it consumed him. Chapter 6, Forging the Future, Marching to War. The courtyard of Jerusalem's palace buzzed with activity, the clatter of hammers and the shouts of laborers echoing off the stone walls. Ethan stood on a balcony overlooking the scene, his silver mask glinting in the midday sun. Below, the master of the royal works, a grizzled man named Anselm, directed a team digging a shallow trench, an experimental irrigation channel to divert water from a nearby stream to the palace gardens. Ethan's heart lifted at the sight. It was a small step, but if it worked, it could transform the kingdom's agriculture, ensuring food for sieges and droughts. His body, however, was less cooperative. The leprosy's ache lingered, though the neem turmeric paste and frankincense oil had reduced the inflammation further, and the willow bark tea kept his fevers at bay. Brother Gerard's daily reports noted smoother skin around the lesions, a minor victory that fueled Ethan's determination. He wasn't curing the disease, not yet, but he was buying time. Time to innovate, to lead, to fight. Anselm climbed the stone steps to the balcony, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sire, the channel is nearly complete," he said, his tone cautious. "The stream's flow is strong, but the soil is hard. It will take weeks to extend it to the fields beyond the city." Ethan nodded, Baldwin's memories supplying context. Jerusalem's arid climate made water a precious resource. "Focus on a single field first," he said. "Prove it works, then expand. And the water wheel, have you begun?" Anselm hesitated, clearly uneasy with the king's unconventional ideas. "We have timber and stone, sire, but the design you described, a wheel turned by the river to grind grain? It is unlike our hand mills. The carpenters are uncertain where to begin." Ethan suppressed a sigh. He wasn't an engineer, but he'd seen diagrams of medieval water wheels online. The concept was simple, a wheel with paddles, driven by water, turning a millstone. It could triple the output of flour, feeding soldiers and civilians alike. "I'll sketch it," he said, gesturing to a nearby table where parchment and charcoal waited. "The wheel must be wide, with flat paddles to catch the current. Connect it to a shaft that turns the stone. Start small, test it on a stream near the city." Anselm's eyes widened at the king's confidence, but he bowed. "As you command, my lord." "And the stone thrower you spoke of?" Ethan's mind flashed to the counterweight trebuchet, a siege weapon that wouldn't appear in Europe for decades. Unlike the traction trebuchets of this era, which relied on teams of men pulling ropes, a counterweight design used gravity for greater range and power. It was a game-changer for sieges, and with Saladin's army approaching, Ethan needed every advantage. "Build a frame with a long arm," he explained, sketching a rough diagram. "Hang a heavy weight on the short end, a sling for stones on the long end. When the weight drops, the arm hurls the stone. Start with a small model, test it in the courtyard." Anselm studied the sketch, his skepticism giving way to curiosity. "If this works, sire, it could breach walls thought impregnable. But the barons may question such novelties." "Let them," Ethan said, channeling Baldwin's authority. "I'll show them results." As Anselm departed to relay the orders, Ethan's thoughts turned to the looming battle. Montgisard was days away, and Baldwin's memories painted a vivid picture, a daring ambush in a narrow valley, Templar knights breaking Saladin's lines. A victory against overwhelming odds. Ethan had the strategy, but leading an army in person was another matter. He was no warrior, yet the kingdom expected their king to ride at the forefront. Despite his frailty, he descended to the armory, where squires were preparing his armor, a light hauberk of chainmail, tailored to his weakened frame, and a padded surcoat bearing the cross of Jerusalem. Balian of Ibelin awaited him, inspecting a rack of swords. "Sire," Balian said, bowing, "the army assembles outside the city. 500 knights, 2,000 foot, and the Templars and Hospitallers, as you ordered." "We march at dawn." Ethan nodded, his bandaged hands flexing instinctively. "The valley at Montgisard, ensure the scouts mark every path. We'll draw Saladin in, then hit his flanks with the Templars. Speed is our weapon." Balian's eyes gleamed with respect. "Your father's blood runs true, sire. The men are inspired by your resolve." Ethan wished he felt as confident as he sounded. Baldwin's memories gave him the plan, but the act of leading, riding into battle, rallying men, facing death, was uncharted territory. He lifted a sword, its weight heavier than expected, and practiced a few swings, wincing as his joints protested. The squires adjusted his armor, ensuring it didn't chafe his lesions. The neem paste had helped, but he'd need every ounce of strength for the march. As he left the armory, Sibylla appeared, her expression a mask of concern. "Brother, you risk too much," she said, her voice low. "Leading the army yourself, with your health. Let Raymond take command. Ethan's instincts, sharpened by Baldwin's memories, caught the undercurrent. Sibylla wasn't just worried, she was testing him, probing for weakness. The kingdom needs its king, he said firmly. I ride to Montgisard. Raymond will follow my orders. Her eyes narrowed, but she smiled. Of course, Baldwin. May God guide your sword. As she left, Ethan's mind churned. Sibylla's ambition was a growing shadow, but he had bigger battles to fight. He returned to his chambers, where a small wooden model of a water wheel sat on the table, a prototype built by Anselm's carpenters. He spun it with a finger, imagining fields irrigated, mills turning, trebuchets hurling stones. These were his weapons as much as swords, tools to secure Jerusalem's future. He sat, sipping willow bark tea, and reviewed the trebuchet sketch. It was crude, but feasible. If he could demonstrate its power, the barons would have to listen. Irrigation could mean surplus crops, freeing men for the army. These weren't just innovations, they were lifelines for a kingdom under siege. As night fell, Ethan donned his mask and knelt by his bed, not in prayer but in focus. Tomorrow, he'd march to Montgisard, leading an army with Baldwin's genius and Ethan's ingenuity. The irrigation channel was flowing, the water wheel was taking shape, and the trebuchet model was underway. His body was holding, for now. But as he closed his eyes, the weight of two lives pressed on him, Baldwin's duty, Ethan's hope. Montgisard would test them both. Chapter 7, Marching Under Suspicious Eyes. The dawn air was crisp, carrying the scent of dust and horse sweat as the army of Jerusalem assembled outside the city's walls. Ethan, as Baldwin IV, sat astride a white destrier, his silver mask gleaming beneath a hooded cloak. The chainmail hauberk felt like a lead weight on his frail shoulders, but the neem turmeric paste and frankincense oil had steadied his condition enough to ride. His joints ached, dulled only slightly by the willow bark tea he'd down before dawn. He gripped the reins, Baldwin's memories guiding his posture to project strength despite the leprosy gnawing at his body. Before him stretched a modest but determined force, 500 knights, their armor glinting in the rising sun, 2,000 foot soldiers, gripping spears and shields, and the elite contingents of the Templars and Hospitallers, their red and black crosses stark against white surcoats. Banners fluttered, bearing the Lion of Judah and the Cross of Jerusalem. Ethan felt the weight of their eyes, some reverent, others skeptical, all measuring their masked. King Balian of Ibelin rode up beside him, his expression steady. Sire, the men are ready. The scouts confirmed Saladin's army is encamped near Montgisard, overconfident in their numbers. We can reach the valley by dusk if we march swiftly. Ethan nodded, Baldwin's memories painting the battle strategy: a narrow valley, a sudden charge, Templar knights shattering Saladin's flanks. Keep the pace brisk, he said, his voice firm despite the rasp. We'll camp just outside the valley, out of sight. The Templars lead the charge tomorrow. Balian bowed and relayed the orders, but Ethan's attention shifted to the cluster of nobles riding nearby. Raymond of Tripoli, the regent, sat tall on his horse, his gaze flickering between Ethan and the horizon. Jocelyn de Courtenay, Sibylla's uncle, whispered to a knight Ethan didn't recognize, their eyes darting toward him. The Templar Grand Master, Odo de Saint-Amand, rode with his knights, his zeal palpable but his loyalty to the king, not the church, questionable. The Hospitallers, led by their own master, Roger de Moulins, kept their distance, their allegiance split between duty and ambition. Baldwin's memories supplied context. The nobles were a fractious lot, bound by faith and necessity but divided by greed and power. Raymond sought influence, perhaps even the crown if Baldwin fell. Jocelyn backed Sibylla's ambitions, eyeing a regency for her future son. The Templars and Hospitallers served the cross but often pursued their own agendas, their fortified preceptories rivaling royal authority. Ethan needed to unify them for Montgisard, or Saladin would exploit their divisions. He spurred his horse forward, riding along the column to address the men, a move Baldwin's memories urged as both tradition and necessity. Knights and soldiers of Jerusalem, he called, raising a bandaged hand. We march to defend our holy city against Saladin's host. God is with us, and we will prevail. Cheers rose, loudest from the foot soldiers and levies, their faith in their young king unshaken. The Templars shouted Dies Vult, their fervor infectious. But Ethan caught Raymond's tight-lipped expression in Jocelyn's subtle sneer. He'd have to watch them closely as the army marched. Ethan rode among the nobles, testing the waters. He pulled alongside Raymond, whose cool demeanor masked a calculating mind. Regent, Ethan said, your counsel has been vital. I trust you'll command the left flank at Montgisard, As we planned, Raymond's eyes narrowed, perhaps surprised by the king's directness. Of course, sire, he said, his tone measured. But the men whisper of your health. To lead in battle is a heavy burden. Perhaps I should take the vanguard, to spare you. Ethan's jaw tightened beneath the mask. Baldwin's memories warned that Raymond's offer was less about concern and more about seizing glory and influence. My place is at the front, Ethan said firmly. The men lead their king. You'll hold the flank, Raymond. Raymond inclined his head, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of resentment. As you command, my lord. Next, Ethan approached Jocelyn, whose loyalty to Sibylla made him a wild card. Jocelyn, he said, keeping his tone warm but authoritative, your family has ever served Jerusalem. I rely on you to rally the center with Balian. Jocelyn's smile was thin, his eyes darting to Raymond before returning to Ethan. My honor, sire. But the court speaks of your innovations. Water channels, strange machines. Some fear you stray from tradition. Ethan bristled but kept his voice steady. Tradition hasn't stopped Saladin's armies. My machines will feed our people and break our enemies' walls. Would you rather starve in a siege? Jocelyn's smile faltered, but he bowed. Your wisdom guides us, sire. The exchange left Ethan uneasy. Jocelyn's words echoed Sibylla's warnings, suggesting a coordinated effort to undermine him. He needed to solidify his authority before the battle, or victory at Montgisard might only delay the kingdom's fractures. As the army paused to water their horses at a stream, Ethan dismounted, wincing as his boots hit the ground. He approached Odo de Saint-Amand, the Templar Grand Master, whose men were key to the battle plan. Odo, Ethan said, your knights will strike first at Montgisard. I trust you'll follow my orders precisely. Odo. Ascalon, the Templar stronghold, was nearby, and Baldwin's memories confirmed Odo's pride. The Grand Master's eyes burned with zeal, but he bowed stiffly. The Templars serve God and the kingdom, sire. We will crush the infidel as you command. Ethan nodded, sensing the unspoken tension. The Templars answered to the Pope, not the king, and Odo's fervor could make him reckless. Stay disciplined, Ethan warned. No unauthorized charges. We hit Saladin's flanks together, or we fail. Odo's jaw tightened, but he nodded. As you will, my lord. As the army resumed its march, Ethan's thoughts drifted to his technological projects. The irrigation channel was flowing, Anselm had reported, watering a small plot with promising results. The water wheel prototype was nearly complete, and the counterweight trebuchet model had hurled a stone 50 paces in its first test. These were small victories, but they fueled Ethan's vision, a kingdom self-sufficient in food, its fortresses armed with superior weapons. If he survived Montgisard, he'd push these innovations further, perhaps introducing windmills or basic sanitation to curb disease. But first, he had to win the battle, and the loyalty of his fractious army. By dusk, the army reached the hills overlooking Montgisard's valley. Ethan surveyed the terrain, Baldwin's memories confirming its advantages: narrow paths, steep slopes, perfect for an ambush. He issued orders to camp quietly, concealing their position from Saladin's scouts. As the men settled, Ethan felt the weight of their eyes. He was their king, their leper, their hope. Tomorrow, he'd lead them into battle, balancing Baldwin's genius, Ethan's ingenuity, and a body that could betray him at any moment. He touched the vial of frankincense oil at his belt, a reminder of his fight against leprosy. The political games, Raymond's ambition, Jocelyn's scheming, the Templar zeal, were as dangerous as Saladin's army. But Ethan was ready to face them all, with a king's will and a modern mind. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8, The Shadow of Montgisard. The camp nestled in the hills above Montgisard was shrouded in an uneasy quiet, broken only by the clink of armor, the low murmur of prayers, and the occasional whinny of a horse. The night air was cool, but Ethan felt a feverish heat beneath his silver mask, his leprosy-stricken body protesting the long march. The neem turmeric paste and frankincense oil had kept his lesions from worsening, and the willow bark tea dulled the pain enough to keep him upright, but every movement was a reminder of his fragility. Tomorrow, he would lead an outnumbered army against Saladin's host, and the weight of that truth pressed harder than his chainmail. Ethan stood at the edge of the camp, overlooking the dark expanse of the valley below. Baldwin's memories painted the terrain in vivid detail: the narrow defile where Saladin's army would pass, the rocky slopes perfect for concealing knights, the flat plain where the Templar charge could break the enemy's lines. The plan was sound. Baldwin had won this battle in history, a miraculous victory against overwhelming odds. But Ethan wasn't Baldwin, not entirely, and doubt gnawed at him. Could he inspire men to follow a dying king? Could he outwit Saladin, a commander whose name echoed through centuries? A rustle behind him drew his attention. Balian of Ibelin approached, his face etched with concern in the moonlight. "Sire, the men are restless," he said quietly. "The scouts report Saladin's army is vast, perhaps 12,000, with cavalry and archers. Our numbers are a third of theirs." The barons questioned the wisdom of facing them here. Ethan's stomach tightened, but Baldwin's instincts steadied his voice. "They question because they fear," he said. "We choose the ground, Balian. The valley will choke their numbers, and our knights will strike like a hammer." "Have the Templars and Hospitallers prepared their positions?" Balian nodded. "They're in place, sire, hidden on the eastern slopes. But Odo de Saint-Amand chafes at your orders. He speaks of charging at dawn, regardless of your plan, to cleanse the infidel and guards Ethan's jaw clenched beneath the mask. The Templars' zeal was a double-edged sword. Their ferocity could win the day, but their recklessness could ruin it. Baldwin's memories warned of Odo's pride, a man more loyal to the cross than the crown. "Summon him," Ethan said. "I'll speak to him myself." As Balian left, Ethan's gaze returned to the valley. Torches flickered in the distance, Saladin's camp, a sprawling mass of tents and fires. The sight sent a chill through him. This wasn't a game or a history book. Men would die tomorrow, and his decisions would determine how many. His modern mind screamed for an alternatives, diplomacy, retreat, but Baldwin's resolve anchored him. Jerusalem could not afford to yield. Odo de Saint-Amand arrived, his white surcoat stark against the night, the red Templar cross bowled on his chest. "My lord," he said, bowing stiffly, his tone laced with impatience. "The Templars are ready to strike. Why delay? God wills a swift victory." Ethan met Odo's fervent gaze, channeling Baldwin's authority. "God wills our victory, Odo, but only through discipline. You'll charge when I command, not before. We draw Saladin into the valley, then hit his flanks. Disobey, and you hand him the day." Odo's eyes flashed, but he bowed again, deeper this time. "As you command, sire," he said, though his tone suggested grudging compliance. As he departed, Ethan caught a glance from Raymond of Tripoli, lingering nearby with Jocelyn de Courtenay. The regent's expression was unreadable, but Jocelyn's smirk hinted at trouble. Baldwin's memories confirmed their ambitions. Raymond coveted influence, Jocelyn schemed for Sibylla's future. If the battle faltered, they'd pounce on any sign of weakness. Ethan returned to his tent, where Brother Gerard awaited with a fresh batch of neem paste in a report. "Sire, the lesions on your legs show less redness," he said, applying the mixture with care. "The frankincense seems to soothe the skin, though the neem smell draws complaints from the squires." Ethan managed a faint smile. "Let them complain. It's working." The treatments were a lifeline, but he needed more than salves to survive. His thoughts drifted to his technological projects, a flicker of hope amid the tension. The irrigation channel was watering a test field, and Anselm's latest report described the water wheel prototype spinning smoothly, grinding grain twice as fast as hand mills. The counterweight trebuchet model had hurled a stone 70 paces in its latest test, promising a weapon to bolster Jerusalem's defenses. These innovations could secure the kingdom's future, if he lived to implement them. He dismissed Gerard and sat at a small table, studying a parchment map of Montgisard. Baldwin's memories supplied every detail: the angle of the slopes, the depth of the stream, the likely formation of Saladin's cavalry. Ethan traced the plan, his modern mind adding a twist, positioning archers on the western ridge to harass Saladin's rear, a tactic inspired by a strategy game he'd played. It wasn't in Baldwin's playbook, but it could tip the scales. A commotion outside broke his focus. Raised voices echoed through the camp, and Ethan stepped out to find Raymond and Jocelyn arguing near the Templar tents. Balian was there, trying to mediate, but the tension was palpable. "What's this?" Ethan demanded, his voice cutting through the night. Raymond turned, his face a mask of restraint. "Sire, Jocelyn questions the battle plan. He says the men doubt a frail king can lead them to victory." Jocelyn paled but held his ground. "I speak for the barons, sire. Your health is known. If you fall in battle, the kingdom falls with you. Let Raymond lead, and preserve yourself for Jerusalem." The word stung, but Baldwin's memories armed Ethan with a response. He stepped closer, his masked face inches from Jocelyn's. "My health is God's concern, not yours. I led this kingdom at 13, and I'll lead it tomorrow. Question me again, and you'll answer to the court. The camp fell silent, all eyes on the confrontation. Jocelyn bowed, muttering an apology, but his eyes burned with resentment. Raymond said nothing, his silence louder than words. Ethan turned away, his heart racing. The political vipers were circling, and a single misstep in battle could embolden them. As he returned to his tent, the distant drums of Saladin's camp grew louder, a rhythmic pulse of impending doom. Ethan checked his armor, adjusted his mask, and sipped the last of his willow bark tea. The army was fractious, the odds were dire, and his body was a fragile vessel. Yet Baldwin's strategies burned in his mind, and his modern ideas, archers on the ridge, the promise of trebuchets and water wheels, gave him purpose. He knelt, not in prayer but in resolve. Tomorrow, Montgisard would test him as king, as Ethan, as a man out of time. The valley awaited, and with it, the clash that could save or doom Jerusalem. The drums beat on, and Ethan's hand tightened on his sword. Dawn would bring blood, and he would face it, masked but unyielding. Chapter 9, Triumph of Montgisard. The dawn broke over the valley of Montgisard, painting the rocky slopes in hues of gold and shadow. Ethan, as Baldwin IV, sat astride his destrier at the head of the Crusader army, his silver mask a beacon for his men. The air was thick with tension, the distant rumble of Saladin's drums echoing like a heartbeat of war. His leprosy-racked body ached beneath the chainmail, but the neem turmeric paste and frankincense oil had kept his legion stable, and the willow bark tea dulled the fever enough to keep him sharp. Baldwin's memories burned in his mind, mapping the valley's narrow defile, the slopes where the Templars lay hidden, and the plain where the battle would turn. Ethan's own addition, archers on the western ridge, waited in ambush, a modern twist to tip the scales. The Crusader force was small, 500 knights, 2,000 foot soldiers, and the elite contingents of 80 Templar and 60 Hospitaller knights. Saladin's army, sprawling across the valley below, numbered 12,000, cavalry, archers, and infantry, their banners fluttering under the Ayyubid crescent. The odds were crushing, but Baldwin's victory at Montgisard was etched in history, and Ethan clung to that knowledge, even as doubt gnawed at him. He was no warrior, yet he had to lead. Balian of Ibelin rode up, his face grim but resolute. "Sire, Saladin's vanguard is entering the valley. The Templars are in position, and the archers are concealed. Your orders." Ethan's heart pounded, but Baldwin's instincts steadied him. "Hold until their main force is in the defile," he said, his voice carrying over the rustle of armor. "Then signal the Templars to charge the flanks. The archers will loose when the enemy's rear is exposed. Raymond holds the left, you the center. I'll lead the reserve." Balian nodded, relaying the commands. Ethan glanced at Raymond of Tripoli, commanding the left flank, his expression unreadable. Jocelyn de Courtenay, in the center with Balian, avoided his gaze, his loyalty to Sibylla a lingering threat. Odo de Saint-Amand, the Templar Grand Master, waited with his knights, his zeal barely contained. Ethan had warned him against rash charges, but the man's fervor was a wildfire. The Hospitallers, under Roger de Moulins, were disciplined but distant, their allegiance split. The political fractures in the army were as dangerous as Saladin's numbers, and Ethan knew a single misstep could unravel everything. The drums grew louder, and the valley trembled with the march of Saladin's army. Ethan watched from a low rise, his squires holding the royal banner aloft. The Ayyubid vanguard, light cavalry and infantry, poured into the defile, their formation tight but overconfident, unaware of the trap. Ethan's breath caught as the main body followed, heavy cavalry and archers, their armor glinting. He raised a hand, signaling the scouts to watch for the rear guard. Now, he whispered to himself, Baldwin's memories aligning with his own instincts. The defile was choked, Saladin's forces strung out and vulnerable. He nodded to Harold, who blew a sharp note on a horn. The Templars erupted from the eastern slopes, a thunder of hooves and steel. 80 knights, led by Odo, slammed into the Ayyubid flank, their lances splintering shields and scattering infantry. Screams and the clash of metal filled the air as the Templars carved through the enemy, their white surcoats stained with dust and blood. Ethan's heart raced. This was the moment Baldwin had planned. The hammer strike to disrupt Saladin's lines on the western ridge. Ethan's archers loosed their first volley, a modern addition inspired by strategy games. Arrows rained down on the Ayyubid rear, sowing chaos among the supply train and reserve cavalry. Horses reared, men fell, and the enemy's cohesion faltered. Ethan's gamble was paying off, but the battle was far from one. Saladin's commanders rallied, their heavy cavalry forming a line to counter the Templars. Ethan watched, his grip tightening on the reins. Odo was pushing too far, his knights overextending into the enemy's center. "Damn it," Ethan muttered, then caught himself. Baldwin's decorum was second nature now. He signaled Balian. "Reinforce the Templars. Keep them from breaking ranks." Balian spurred his horse, leading a contingent of knights to shore up the Templar advance. The center, under Balian and Jocelyn, held firm, their spears repelling an Ayyubid countercharge. Raymond's left flank engaged, but Ethan noticed his maneuvers were sluggish, as if testing the king's authority rather than committing fully. The regent's ambition was a shadow on the battlefield, and Ethan marked it for later. The battle raged for hours, the valley a maelstrom of dust, blood, and steel. Ethan led the reserve, a small force of knights, into the fray when Saladin's cavalry threatened to outflank the center. His sword felt foreign in his hand, but Baldwin's muscle memory guided his strikes, parrying a scimitar and felling an Ayyubid rider. Pain lanced through his arms, his leprosy protesting every swing, but adrenaline and willow bark kept him moving. He shouted orders, rallying his men, his masked face a symbol of defiance. The turning point came when the archers' relentless volleys broke the Ayyubid rear. Saladin's supply train scattered, and his reserves faltered, unable to reinforce the front. The Templars, bolstered by Balian's knights, smashed through the enemy's weakened flank, and the Crusader center surged forward, driving a wedge through Saladin's lines. Ethan saw the Ayyubid banners waver, then fall, as panic spread. Saladin's army broke, fleeing the valley in disarray, pursued by Templar and Hospitaller cavalry. By midday, the valley was quiet, strewn with bodies and broken weapons. Ethan dismounted, his legs trembling as he surveyed the carnage. The Crusaders had lost perhaps 500 men, a heavy toll, but Saladin's losses were catastrophic, thousands dead or captured, their camp abandoned. The royal banner stood tall, and cheers rose from the survivors, chanting Jerusalem, and Baldwin. Ethan's chest swelled with relief, but Baldwin's memories tempered his triumph. Montchesard was a victory, but Saladin would return. The political vipers in his own camp were another matter. As the army regrouped, Ethan summoned his commanders to a makeshift council on the battlefield. Balian approached first, bloodied but unbowed. "A miracle, sire," he said, his voice hoarse. "You've turned the tide. The men call you God's champion." Ethan nodded, his mask hiding his exhaustion. "The men fought bravely. But we're not done. Secure the valley, gather the wounded, and collect Saladin's abandoned supplies." Raymond and Jocelyn joined them, their expressions a study in contrasts. Raymond's was guarded, his ambition checked by the victory but not extinguished. Jocelyn's was sour, his earlier doubts proven wrong. Odo de Saint-Amand, his surcoat torn, bowed deeply, his zeal tempered by the king's success. "God's will is done, sire," he said, though Ethan sensed a grudging respect. "You all fought well," Ethan said, his voice carrying Baldwin's authority. "But let this victory bind us. Jerusalem stands only if we stand together." He fixed Raymond with a pointed look. "Regent, your flank held, but I expected swifter action. We'll discuss this in Jerusalem." Raymond's jaw tightened, but he bowed. "As you'll, my lord." Jocelyn shifted uncomfortably. "The barons will rejoice, sire. Your leadership silenced all doubt." Ethan doubted that, but he let it pass. The victory had strengthened his position, but the court scheming would resume. Sibylla's absence from the battle was telling, her influence lingered through Jocelyn, and Ethan would need to confront her soon as the army prepared to return to Jerusalem. Ethan inspected the captured Ayyubid supplies, tents, weapons, even a few medical texts in Arabic. His modern mind seized on the texts, they might hold clues to refine his leprosy treatments. He ordered them sent to Brother Gerard, along with a message to continue the neem and frankincense regimen back in Jerusalem. The city erupted in celebration as the army marched through the gates, bells ringing from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Ethan, carried in a litter to spare his body, waved to the crowds, his mask a symbol of triumph. But in his chambers that night, exhaustion crashed over him. The battle had tested his limits, and his lesions, though stable, throbbed from the strain. He sipped willow bark tea, staring at a parchment sketch of the counterweight trebuchet. The victory at Montchesard had bought him time to push his irrigation channels, water wheels, and siege weapons, time to fight his disease, time to outmaneuver the court. Yet as he closed his eyes, Baldwin's memories whispered of Saladin's resilience, and Ethan's own fears echoed. Could he keep this up, a modern soul in a dying king's body, leading a kingdom on the edge of collapse? Chapter 10. a throne contested, a kingdom to rebuild. The streets of Jerusalem rang with jubilation as the victorious army returned, the royal banner of the cross and lion fluttering above the procession. Ethan, as Baldwin IV, rode in a cushioned litter, his silver mask concealing the exhaustion etched into his face. The Battle of Montgisart had been a triumph, Saladin's army shattered, thousands of his men dead or fled, and Jerusalem's faith in its young king restored. Yet Ethan's body ached, the leprosy's grip unrelenting despite the neem turmeric paste and frankincense oil that kept his lesions from worsening. The willow bark tea dulled his fever, but the strain of battle had pushed him to his limits. He was a king on borrowed time, and the court's political vipers were far from defeated. The palace great hall was packed with nobles, clergy, and knights, their cheers echoing as Ethan ascended the dais to his throne. The victory had silenced doubters, but Baldwin's memories warned him of the fragility of such loyalty. Raymond of Tripoli, Jocelyn de Courtenay, and even the Templars watched him with calculating eyes, and Sibylla's absence from the battlefield lingered like a shadow. Ethan knew he had to confront her. Her ambition, tied to Jocelyn and her future son, threatened to undermine his rule. As the court dispersed, Ethan summoned Sibylla to his private chambers. He sat at a wooden table, a parchment map of the kingdom spread before him, alongside a sketch of the counterweight trebuchet and a report on the irrigation channel's success. The water wheel prototype was now grinding grain, and the test field's crops were thriving, a small but tangible step toward food security. These innovations were his lifeline, but manpower was the kingdom's weakness. Montgisart had cost 500 men, and Jerusalem's forces were stretched thin. Ethan's modern mind churned with ideas to address this. Could he reform recruitment, train levies more efficiently, or incentivize settlers to bolster the population? Sibylla entered, her auburn hair framed by a silk veil, her green eyes sharp with a mix of deference and defiance. "Brother," she said, curtsying, "your victory at Montgisart is the talk of the kingdom. The people call you God's chosen." Ethan studied her, Baldwin's memories supplying her motives, loyalty to family, but a fierce ambition for her son's claim to the throne. "The people's faith is hardening," he said, his voice steady despite the rasp. "But your absence from the battlefield was noted, sister. Jocelyn spoke against me before the battle, questioning my health, my leadership. Did you put those words in his mouth?" Sibylla's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, her tone smooth. "Jocelyn speaks for himself, Baldwin. I urged caution, not disloyalty. Your health concerns us all. To risk yourself in battle, my health is my burden," Ethan cut in, his voice sharp with Baldwin's authority. "I led the army and won. Your whispers, through Jocelyn or others, weaken the kingdom. If you seek to secure your son's future, do it by supporting me, not scheming with barons." Her eyes flashed, but she lowered her gaze, a calculated gesture. "I am your sister, Baldwin. I want only Jerusalem's strength. But the court fears for you. If you fall, who leads? My son is but a child, and Raymond follows my orders," Ethan said, though he knew the regent's loyalty was tenuous. "And you will cease stirring doubt. Montgisart proves I am king. Stand with me, Sibylla, or stay silent." Sibylla's lips tightened. But she nodded. "As you command, my lord." She curtsied and left, her departure leaving a chill in the room. Ethan knew the confrontation had only delayed her maneuvering. Baldwin's memories warned that Sibylla's ambition would resurface, and he'd need to bind her loyalty, or neutralize her influence alone. Ethan leaned back, his bandaged hands trembling from the strain of the day. Brother Gerard's latest report lay on the table. The neem paste and frankincense oil continued to reduce inflammation, and a new batch of Arabic medical texts from Saladin's captured supplies hinted at herbal compounds for pain relief. Ethan's modern knowledge seized on these. Could he isolate plant-based antiseptics or analgesics? It was a long shot, but every day he slowed the leprosy's progress was a day to reform the kingdom. His thoughts turned to manpower, a problem Baldwin's memories underscored. The Crusader states relied on feudal levies, knights, and religious orders, but losses like Montgisart's were unsustainable. Saladin would regroup, and Jerusalem needed more soldiers. Ethan's 21st century perspective offered solutions. Could he standardize training for levies, creating a more disciplined militia? In his time, he'd read about medieval towns forming communal militias. Perhaps he could organize Jerusalem's citizens into a reserve force, trained in basic spear and shield tactics. Rewarding service with land or tax exemptions might attract settlers from Europe, bolstering the population. He jotted notes on a parchment, his handwriting shaky but determined. First, a training program, weekly drills for able-bodied men in Jerusalem and outlying towns, focusing on formation and archery. Second, incentives, offer land grants in safer regions like Galilee to knights and settlers willing to serve. Third, alliances, strengthen ties with Byzantine envoys or Armenian lords to secure mercenaries or auxiliaries. These reforms would take time, but Montezuma's victory gave him political capital to push them. His technological projects offered another angle. The irrigation channel's success could support larger farms, freeing men from labor to train as soldiers. The water wheel, now operational, could scale to multiple mills, increasing food production. The counterweight trebuchet, still in prototype, promised a defensive edge. Ethan envisioned a network of fortified outposts armed with these weapons, reducing the need for large garrisons. He'd meet with Anselm tomorrow to refine the trebuchet's design and expand the irrigation network. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Balian of Ibelin entered, his face weary but proud. "Sire, the city is secure, and the wounded are tended. The barons are quiet, for now. But Raymond speaks of consolidating power under a regency, citing your health." Ethan's jaw clenched. Raymond's ambition was predictable, but dangerous. "Summon the court tomorrow," he said. "I'll announce plans to strengthen the kingdom, training for levies, rewards for service. Let Raymond try to argue against that." Balian nodded, a spark of admiration in his eyes. "You've changed, sire. Montezuma has made you a legend, but these plans, they're bold. The barons may resist." "Let them," Ethan said, his voice firm. "Montezuma bought us time, not safety. We rebuild, or we fall." As Balian left, Ethan stood, wincing as his joints protested. He looked out the window at Jerusalem's moonlit domes, the city he'd fought for. Sibylla's defiance, Raymond's scheming, and Saladin's inevitable return loomed large, but Ethan felt a flicker of hope. With Baldwin's strategies, his modern ideas, and a body holding steady, he could reform the kingdom, more soldiers, better defenses, a stronger future. But as he adjusted his mask, the weight of his dual identity pressed on him. He was Baldwin, he was Ethan, and the path ahead would test both. Chapter 11, A New Vision, A King Transformed. The great hall of Jerusalem's palace was a cauldron of anticipation, its stone walls lined with nobles, knights, and clergy, their murmurs rising like a tide. Ethan, as Baldwin IV, sat on the throne, his silver mask gleaming under the torchlight, his bandaged hands resting on the armrests. The victory at Montezuma had cloaked him in a mantle of divine favor, but his body ached, the leprosy's grip unrelenting despite the neem turmeric paste and frankincense oil that kept his lesions stable. The willow bark tea dulled his fever, granting him the clarity to face the court. Today, he would unveil reforms to reshape the kingdom, leveraging Baldwin's memories and his modern ingenuity to secure Jerusalem's future. The hall fell silent as Ethan rose, his frail frame cloaked in authority. Baldwin's memories guided his posture, but Ethan's resolve fueled his words. "Lords and knights of Jerusalem," he began, his voice steady despite the rasp, "Montezuma was a triumph, a sign of God's favor. But Saladin will return, and our enemies circle. We must grow stronger, more men, better defenses, a kingdom that thrives, not merely survives." The court leaned forward, intrigued but wary. Raymond of Tripoli stood to one side, his expression guarded. Jocelyn de Courtenay, Sibylla's uncle, watched with a tight smile, and Sibylla herself, near the front, met Ethan's gaze with a mix of pride and calculation. Balian of Ibelin, ever loyal, nodded encouragingly. The Templars and Hospitallers, their leaders Odo de Saint Amand and Roger de Moulins, stood stiffly, their allegiance to the crown tempered by their own agendas. Ethan gestured to Anselm, the master of the royal works, who stepped forward with a parchment. "Our fields now drink from new channels," Ethan said, "bringing water to crops that will feed our people through sieges. A water wheel in Jerusalem grinds grain faster than 10 men. These works will spread to Jaffa, Acre, and Galilee, ensuring food for our soldiers and citizens." Murmurs rippled through the hall, a mix of awe and skepticism. Anselm unrolled the parchment, revealing a sketch of the counterweight trebuchet. "This machine," Ethan continued, "hurls stones farther and harder than any mangonel. We've tested a model, 70 paces with a single throw. We will build them for our fortresses, starting with Ascalon and Carrick." The court stirred, nobles exchanging glances. Jocelyn spoke first, his tone laced with doubt. "Sire, these machines are costly. The barons' coffers are not endless, and such novelties may provoke the church's concern." Ethan's eyes narrowed beneath the mask, Baldwin's memories warning of Jocelyn's ties to Sibylla. The cost of defeat is greater, he countered. These machines will save lives, not drain purses. The Church seeks Jerusalem's survival as much as we do. He glanced at the patriarch, who nodded reluctantly, unwilling to challenge the victorious King. Raymond stepped forward, his voice smooth but probing. Your vigor is inspiring, sire, but your health concerns us. These reforms, these machines, can they be sustained if you tire? The hall tensed, the unspoken question of Baldwin's leprosy hanging heavy. Ethan felt the sting but drew on Baldwin's resolve. My health is God's will, he said, his voice cutting through the silence. Manchester proves I can lead. These reforms will outlast me, securing Jerusalem for generations. Will you support them, Raymond, or do you question God's chosen? Raymond's jaw tightened, but he bowed. I serve the kingdom, sire. Sibylla's eyes flickered, her silence louder than words. Ethan knew their earlier confrontation had only paused their ambitions, not ended them. He pressed on, outlining his vision for manpower. We will train every able-bodied man in Jerusalem, Jaffa, and Acre, he said. Weekly drills, teaching spear and bow, to form a militia ready to defend our walls. Land grants in Galilee will reward service, drawing settlers from Europe to swell our ranks. I've sent envoys to Byzantium and Armenia, seeking mercenaries to bolster our army. The court buzzed, some nobles nodding, others frowning. Balian spoke up, his voice steady. Sire, this could double our forces in time. The barons of Galilee will welcome settlers, if the crown supports them. Ethan nodded, grateful for Balian's support. The crown will provide tools and seed for new farms, irrigated by channels like Jerusalem's. This is our path to strength. His thoughts turned to fortification, a priority Baldwin's memories underscored. Jerusalem's castles, cracked as chevaliers, Carrick, Ascalon, were formidable, but Saladin's reach demanded more. We will build new fortresses, Ethan declared, at Mount Gizzard's Valley, to guard the southern approach, and near Gaza, to shield our coast. We'll expand Ascalon's walls, arming them with trebuchets. And I propose claiming the springs of Jericho, fortifying them to secure water and a defensive outpost. The patriarch raised a hand, his voice cautious. Sire, expanding into Jericho risks provoking Saladin further. The church urges prudence. Ethan met his gaze, his modern perspective sharpening his response. Prudence won't stop Saladin's armies. Jericho's springs will feed our fields and inam water in a siege. We fortify or we fall. The hall fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Ethan's transformation was undeniable. Where once a frail boy king had relied on regents, now stood a leader blending Baldwin's military genius with a vision no one could place. Whispers of God's chosen mingled with murmurs of unease. Odo de Saint Amand, the Templar Grand Master, bowed deeply. The Templars will guard your new fortresses, sire, he said, his zeal aligning with Ethan's resolve. As the meeting adjourned, Ethan summoned Anselm to his chambers to discuss expanding the technologies. Send carpenters to Jaffa with a water wheel design, he instructed. Train their smiths to build trebuchets. The irrigation channels must reach Acre by spring. Report progress weekly. Anselm bowed, his earlier skepticism replaced by respect. Your vision reshapes the kingdom, sire. The works will spread as you command alone. Ethan sat, his bandaged hands trembling from the effort of the day. Brother Gerard's latest report noted further improvement in his lesions, and the Arabic medical texts from Saladin's camp hinted at a plant called aloe vera for soothing skin. Ethan jotted a note to procure it, his modern mind envisioning a regimen combining aloe with neem for better results. But his health was only one battle. His reforms, militia training, settler incentives, new fortresses, were ambitious, but the court's divisions threatened them. Sibylla's silence, Raymond's probing, Jocelyn's doubts, they'd exploit any weakness. Montchesert had bought him time, but Saladin would regroup, and the kingdom needed to be ready. Ethan's thoughts drifted to his modern knowledge. Could he introduce basics annotation to reduce disease in cities, freeing more men for the army? Or simple pulleys for fortress construction, speeding up his plans? He stood, wincing as his joints protested, and looked out at Jerusalem's moonlit walls. The kingdom was his to save, but the cost was high. He was Baldwin, the Leper King, and Ethan, the barista out of time, and the line between them blurred with every decision. The court saw a transformed king, but Ethan felt the weight of a man fighting history itself. With new fortresses rising, machines spreading, and a militia forming, he'd forge a stronger Jerusalem, or die trying. Chapter 12, Letters to Kings, Seeds of Change. The morning light spilled into Baldwin's chambers, illuminating a clutter of parchments on Ethan's table, sketches of counterweight trebuchets, reports on irrigation channels, and a map marked with planned fortresses at Montgisard and Gaza. Ethan, as King Baldwin IV, sat hunched over a fresh sheet, quill in his bandaged hand, drafting letters to distant rulers. His leprosy-racked body ached, but the neem turmeric paste, now mixed with aloe vera from Saladin's captured texts, had further eased the inflammation of his lesions. The willow bark tea kept his fever at bay, granting him the focus to push his reforms and secure Jerusalem's future. Montgisard's victory had bought him time, but Saladin's shadow loomed, and the court's vipers, Sibylla, Raymond, Jocelyn, watched for any stumble. Ethan's reforms were taking root. Reports from Jaffa described irrigation channels watering fields, doubling crop yields in test plots. Acres carpenters had built a second water wheel, grinding grain with efficiency that stunned local merchants. The counterweight trebuchet prototype in Jerusalem had hurled a stone 80 paces in its latest test, and Anselm, the master of the royal works, was training smiths to replicate it in Ascalon. Yet resistance simmered, some barons grumbled about costs, and the patriarch had sermonized against unnatural machines, citing divine reliance over human ingenuity. Ethan, blending Baldwin's authority with his modern pragmatism, had silenced them in court, but whispers persisted. His latest challenge was manpower. The militia training program had begun, with weekly drills in Jerusalem teaching citizens spear and bow tactics. Balian of Ibelin reported enthusiasm among the city's men, but rural barons resisted, fearing armed peasants might challenge their authority. Ethan's offer of land grants in Galilee had drawn a trickle of European settlers, but not enough. To bolster the army, he needed allies, external powers to counter Saladin's inevitable return. Baldwin's memory supplied names: Manuel I Comnenus, Emperor of Byzantium, a powerful but cautious ally, and Leo I, King of Armenian Cilicia, whose mountain warriors could tip the balance. Ethan dipped his quill, crafting a letter to Manuel first. His modern perspective shaped a tone more direct than the flowery diplomacy of the era. To the Emperor of the Romans, he wrote, Jerusalem, victorious at Montgisard, seeks alliance against the Ayyubid threat. We offer trade, grain, relics, access to our ports, for your ships and soldiers. Together, we can hold the Holy Land for Christendom. He paused, Baldwin's memories warning of Manuel's pride. He added, your wisdom and strength are renowned, let us unite as brothers in faith. The letter to Leo was similar, emphasizing shared enemies and promising Armenian merchants favorable terms in Jerusalem's markets. He sealed the letters, entrusting them to envoys with orders to sail for Constantinople and Tarsus. The alliances were a gamble. Byzantium was distant, Armenia unpredictable, but Ethan's 21st century mindset saw the value of coalitions. If he could secure even a few hundred Byzantine cataphracts or Armenian archers, Jerusalem's defenses would strengthen significantly. His thoughts turned to fortification. Montgisard's victory had exposed the need for a stronger defensive network. The planned fortresses at Montgisard and Gaza were underway, with stone quarried and masons dispatched. Ethan envisioned a chain of outposts along the southern border, each armed with counterweight trebuchets to deter Saladin's incursions. Expanding into Jericho, with its vital springs, remained a priority. Control of water could sustain armies and deny resources to enemies. But building required men and money, and the baron's reluctance was a hurdle. Could he introduce simpler construction methods, like pulleys or basic cranes, to speed fortress building? His modern knowledge was vague on mechanics, but he'd seen enough documentaries to sketch rough designs. A knock interrupted his musings. Balian entered, his face lined with fatigue but bright with news. Sire, the militia in Jerusalem numbers 300 trained men, and Jaffa reports 100 more. The irrigation channels in Acre are drawing settlers, and the trebuchet design is being studied in Ascalon. Your vision spreads, but the barons, Jocelyn chief among them, complain of overreach. Ethan's jaw tightened beneath the mask. Jocelyn's loyalty to Sibylla was a constant thorn. Some in the court, he said. I'll address them tomorrow. And send word to Anselm, prioritize the Montgisard fortress and test a pulley system for lifting stones. Balian bowed, but his eyes held concern. Sire, Sibylla has been meeting with Jocelyn and Raymond. They speak of your health, your radical changes. The victory at Montgisard holds them at bay, but not for long. Ethan nodded, Baldwin's memories confirming the threat. Sibylla's ambition for her son's future crown was a slow-burning fuse, and Raymond's regency gave him leverage. He needed to solidify his authority before their scheming boiled over. That evening, Ethan stood by his window, staring at Jerusalem's moonlit domes. The weight of his dual identity pressed heavily: Baldwin's duty to the kingdom, Ethan's desire to survive and innovate. Was he becoming Baldwin, losing the barrister who dreamed of a quiet life? The leprosy treatments were holding, but each day was a battle against his body. The new aloe mixture soothed his skin, and he'd ordered Gerard to experiment with mint-based infusions from the Arabic texts, hoping for a stronger analgesic. But his health was a means to an end: to reform Jerusalem, to outlast Saladin, to leave a legacy. A scout's report, delivered at dusk, darkened his mood. Saladin was regrouping in Egypt, his spies probing Jerusalem's borders. The alliances with Byzantium and Armenia were urgent, as were the fortresses and militia. Ethan's modern mind envisioned a kingdom fortified not just with walls but with resilience, irrigated fields, efficient mills, trained citizens, and a network of castles. He'd push for a crane designed to speed construction, perhaps inspired by Roman engineering he'd read about. If he could streamline fortress building, Jerusalem could hold its frontier against Saladin's next assault. As he prepared for the court meeting, Ethan adjusted his mask, his bandaged hands steady despite the ache. Tomorrow, he'd face Sibylla, Raymond, and the barons, presenting his reforms as divine will to counter their doubts. The letters to Manuel and Leo were on their way, carrying hopes of alliance. The kingdom was changing, fields watered, machines built, fortresses rising, but so was Ethan. He was Baldwin IV, king of Jerusalem, and Ethan Caldwell, a man out of time, and the balance between them would determine the kingdom's fate. Chapter 13, A Court Divided, a Kingdom Rising. The great hall of Jerusalem's palace thrummed with tension, the air thick with the scent of incense and the weight of scrutiny. Ethan, as King Baldwin IV, sat on the throne, his silver mask a stark contrast to the vibrant tapestries behind him. His leprosy-ravaged body ached, the neem turmeric aloe paste soothing but not curing his lesions, and a recent flare of fever had forced him to double his willow bark tea intake. Yet Montgisard's victory cloaked him in authority, and Baldwin's memories steadied his resolve. Today, he would face the court to defend his reforms, knowing Sibylla, Raymond, and Jocelyn waited to challenge him. His modern mind churned with new ideas, technologies to bolster the kingdom beyond what he'd already begun. The hall was packed, nobles in rich tunics, knights in polished armor, clergy clutching crosses. Balian of Ibelin stood near the dais, a pillar of loyalty, while Anselm, the master of the royal works, held sketches of the latest projects. Sibylla, her auburn hair veiled, watched with a calculated smile. Raymond of Tripoli, regal and guarded, stood beside Jocelyn de Courtenay, whose eyes gleamed with barely concealed ambition. The Templars and Hospitallers, led by Odo de Saint-Amand and Roger de Moulins, flanked the room, their allegiance to the crown uncertain. Ethan rose, his bandaged hands gripping the throne's arms. Lords of Jerusalem, he began, his voice carrying Baldwin's gravitas, Montgisard was a triumph, but our enemies gather. We must strengthen our kingdom, more men, stronger walls, fields that feed us through war. Our militia trains in Jerusalem and Jaffa, with 300 men ready and more joining. Irrigation channels water acres fields, and water wheels grind grain in Jaffa. A new fortress rises at Montgisard, aided by a device to lift stones faster than ever. Anselm stepped forward, unrolling a sketch of the pulley system, Ethan's modern-inspired innovation, adapted from vague memories of Roman engineering. This system, Ethan continued, has doubled the speed of construction at Montgisard. Stones are lifted with ropes and weights, freeing men for other tasks. We will use it at Gaza and Ascalon, and arm these fortresses with trebuchets that hurl stones 80 paces. The court murmured, some nodding, others frowning. A baron from Galilee spoke up, his voice hesitant. Sire, these works are marvelous, but costly. The baron's levies are strained, and settlers in Galilee demand protection. Ethan nodded, anticipating the concern. The crown will fund tools and seed for settlers, and the militia will guard them. I've sent envoys to Byzantium and Armenia for allies to bolster our ranks. Jerusalem will not stand alone. Jocelyn seized the moment, his tone smooth but barbed. Your zeal is admirable, sire, but these machines and militias unsettle the order. Arming peasants risks rebellion, and these pulleys, are they not a departure from God's design? The hwach tensed, eyes darting to Ethan. Baldwin's memories warned of Jocelyn's ties to Sibylla, who remained silent, her gaze piercing. Ethan leaned forward, his voice cold. God gave us minds to build, Jocelyn. Montgisard proved his favor. The militia will defend, not rebel, and my machines will break Saladin's walls. Do you doubt Jerusalem's survival? Jocelyn paled, bowing. I serve the kingdom, Sire. Raymond spoke next, his voice measured. Your health, sire, concerns us all. These reforms demand a king's strength. If you falter, who leads? The accusation hung heavy, and Ethan felt the court's eyes on his masked face. I led at Montgisard, he said, his voice rising. I will lead now. Support my reforms, Raymond, or name your alternative before this court. All fell silent, Raymond's eyes narrowing before he bowed. I stand with you, Sire. Sibylla finally spoke, her voice soft but pointed. Brother, your vision inspires, but haste risks division. The barons need time to embrace such changes. Ethan met her gaze, Baldwin's memory screaming her ambition. Time is a luxury we lack, sister. Saladin regroups, and we must be ready. Stand with me, or the court will know where you stand. Sibylla's smile tightened, but she nodded, her silence a temporary retreat. The court adjourned, buzzing with whispers of the king's transformation, a frail boy now a commanding leader, his reforms reshaping the kingdom. Later, in his chambers, Ethan reviewed a letter from Byzantine Emperor Manuel I, delivered that morning. To the King of Jerusalem, it read, your victory at Montgisard is renowned. We offer ships for your ports and 500 cataphracts, but in exchange, we seek relics from the Holy Sepulchre and trade rights in Acre. Ethan frowned. Manuel's support was vital, but the cost was steep. He drafted a reply, offering limited trade concessions but holding firm on relics, his modern pragmatism guiding the negotiation. A scout's report darkened his mood. Saladin's forces were probing Gaza, testing Jerusalem's southern defenses. The urgency of Ethan's reforms, militia, fortresses, alliances, intensified. His thoughts turned to new technologies. The pulley system's success sparked ideas. Windmills, simpler than water wheels, could harness coastal breezes to grind grain or pump water for irrigation. Basic sanitation, boiling water, latrines outside city walls, could curb disease, freeing men for the army. Improved metallurgy, like better forges for stronger steel, could enhance weapons and trebuchet components. Ethan's knowledge was limited, but he'd read enough to know these were feasible with 12th century tools. If framed as divine inspiration, he jotted notes, his bandaged hands trembling. A recent fever spike had worried Brother Gerard, who'd suggested a new infusion of chamomile from the Arabic texts to calm inflammation. Ethan approved, his modern mind hoping for synergistic effects with aloe and neem. But as he wrote, a wave of doubt hit. Was he still Ethan, the barista dreaming of a quiet life, or was Baldwin's duty consuming him? Montgisard had made him a legend, but the cost, his health, his identity, not at him. Anselm's report arrived, detailing the Montgisard fortress. The pulley system had halved construction time, and the first trebuchet was being assembled. Ethan ordered its design sent to Gaza and plans for windmills drafted for Jaffa. Fortifying Jericho remained a goal, its springs a defensive asset, but required more men, hence the militia and Byzantine alliance. As night fell, Ethan stood by his window, Jerusalem's domes aglow. Saladin's probes, Sibylla's ambition, Raymond's scheming, each was a battle. But with fortresses rising, machines spreading, and allies on the horizon, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. He was Baldwin IV, Ethan Caldwell, a king forging a future against history's tide. Chapter 14, Fire and Stone, Plots and Pain. The sun beat down on the half-finished fortress at Montgisard, its stone walls rising swiftly under the rhythmic creak of pulleys. Ethan, as King Baldwin IV, stood on a wooden platform overlooking the site, his silver mask glinting in the midday light. His leprosy-ravaged body trembled, a recent fever spike burning through the willow bark tea's relief, and the neem turmeric aloe paste struggled to contain a new outbreak of lesions on his legs. Brother Gerard had warned of overexertion, but Ethan pushed on, driven by Baldwin's duty and his own determination. The fortress was a symbol of his vision, a stronger Jerusalem, fortified against Saladin's return. Anselm, the master of the royal works, approached, his face flushed with pride. Sire, the pulley system has halved construction time. The Montgisard fortress will be complete in weeks, and Gaza's walls are rising. The trebuchet is ready for its first full-scale test. Ethan nodded, his bandaged hands gripping a staff for support. The counterweight trebuchet, inspired by his modern knowledge, stood in the courtyard, a towering frame of timber and iron, its long arm poised to hurl a stone the size of a barrel. Below, nobles, knights, and a reluctant contingent of barons gathered, their murmurs a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Balian of Ibelin stood by Ethan's side, his loyalty unwavering, while Sibylla, Raymond, and Jocelyn watched from a distance, their expressions unreadable. "Begin," Ethan commanded, his voice raspy but firm. Anselm signaled, and workers released the counterweight. The trebuchet's arm swung upward, the sling snapping forward with a crack. A stone sword, arcing over the valley to crash into a wooden target 200 paces away, splintering it into fragments. The crowd gasped, knights cheering, but Jocelyn's scowl deepened, and Raymond's eyes narrowed. Ethan felt a surge of triumph. His modern ingenuity, cloaked as divine inspiration, was reshaping the kingdom. Back in Jerusalem, Ethan convened a smaller council in his chambers to discuss expanding his reforms. The irrigation channels now watered fields in Jaffa and Acre, and water wheels turned in both cities, boosting grain production. The militia training had grown to 500 men across the kingdom, with drills spreading to rural towns. But a scout's report chilled him. Saladin's forces had raided a village near Gaza, testing the new defenses. The militia had repelled them, but the attack signaled Saladin's regrouping, a shadow over Ethan's progress. His thoughts turned to new technology, sparked by a half-remembered podcast about the Korean hwachas, a cart-mounted launcher firing volleys of gunpowder arrows. Gunpowder was unknown in 12th century Europe, but Ethan recalled that saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal could be combined with effort. Saltpeter might be sourced from dung heaps, sulfur from volcanic regions, and charcoal was plentiful. A simplified hwachas, perhaps a cart with tubes launching fire arrows ignited by oil-soaked rags, could be feasible with Jerusalem's resources. It would terrify enemies, offering a psychological edge in battle. Anselm, Ethan said, sketching a rough design of a cart with bamboo or metal tubes. "Can we craft tubes to hold fire arrows, launched by a spark or flame? Mounted on a cart, they could strike from a distance, like a volley of archers." Anselm frowned, studying the sketch. "Sire, we have no such weapon, but metal tubes could be forged, and oil-soaked arrows might work. It would take time. Smiths are stretched with the trebuchets. Do it," Ethan said. "Start small, test one tube. If it works, we'll build more for the fortresses." As Anselm left, a Byzantine envoy arrived, bearing a letter from Emperor Manuel. King Baldwin. It read, "Your victory at Montchisard earns our respect. We offer 600 cataphracts and 10 ships, but we require a share of Acre's port revenues and a relic from the Holy Sepulchre." Ethan grimaced. The demands were steep, but the cataphracts could bolster his army. He drafted a reply, offering partial trade rights but differing on relics, his modern pragmatism tempering Baldwin's piety. The court meeting that evening was a storm waiting to break. Ethan faced the assembled nobles, his fever spiking despite the chamomile infusion Gerard had added to his regimen. "The Montchisard fortress rises," he declared, "and Gazas will follow. Trebuchets will arm them, and irrigation feeds our people. The militia grows, and Byzantium considers our alliance. But I hear whispers of doubt. Speak now, or hold your peace." Jocelyn stepped forward, emboldened by Sibylla's nod. "Sire, your machines and armed peasants unsettle the kingdom. The barons fear rebellion, and your health falters. Let Raymond guide these reforms, sparing you the burden." Ethan's blood boiled, Baldwin's memories fueling his response. "My health led us to Montchisard's victory," he snapped, rising despite the pain. "The barons fear change, not rebellion. These reforms, fortresses, trebuchets, militias, are Jerusalem's shield. Oppose them, Jocelyn, and you oppose the kingdom." Sibylla interjected, her voice smooth. "Brother, we seek only stability. Your vision is bold, but the barons need assurance. Share your plans with us, let us aid you." Ethan saw through her ploy, a bid for control, cloaked in concern. "My plans are shared," he said coldly. "Support them, sister, or the court will judge your loyalty." The hall fell silent, Raymond's silence a calculated retreat. The meeting ended with a grudging agreement, but Ethan knew Sibylla and Jocelyn were plotting, likely with Raymond's tacit support alone. Ethan collapsed onto his bed, his fever burning. Gerard arrived, applying a new mixture of chamomile, aloe, and mint, but warned that stress was worsening the leprosy. Ethan's mind swirled. Baldwin's duty was consuming him, his memories of Chicago fading. Was he losing himself? The hwachas idea, alongside windmills and sanitation, anchored his modern identity. He envisioned latrines outside city walls to curb disease, windmills for coastal towns, and stronger steel for swords and trebuchet parts. These were his legacy. If he could survive the scouts' report of Saladin's raid lingered, a reminder of the ticking clock. With fortresses rising, the hwachas in early development, and Byzantium's envoy offering hope, Ethan clung to his dual mission: save Jerusalem, save himself. But as he adjusted his mask, the line between Baldwin and Ethan blurred, and the fever whispered of battles yet to come. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15, Fire in the Skies, Betrayal in the Court. The air at Montgisard crackled with anticipation as Ethan, as King Baldwin IV, stood before a makeshift testing ground, his silver mask reflecting the midday sun. His leprosy-ravaged body shuddered, a fever spiking despite the chamomile mint aloe infusion Brother Gerard had prepared. New lesions had erupted on his chest, resisting the neem turmeric paste, and the pain gnawed at his resolve. Yet Baldwin's memories drove him forward, and his modern ingenuity fueled the moment, the first test of a simplified hwachas, a cart-mounted array of 6 bamboo tubes loaded with oil-soaked arrows, rigged with rags for ignition. Anselm, the master of the royal works, adjusted the cart, his face tense. "Sire, the tubes are primed. We've no gunpowder, only oil and pitch, but a spark should launch the arrows." "Ready," Ethan nodded, his bandaged hands gripping a staff for support. Balian of Ibelin and a handful of knights watched, alongside a skeptical Jocelyn de Courtenay and a curious Odo de Saint-Amand. Ethan had envisioned the hwachas from a distant memory, a Korean weapon of volleys and fire, and adapted it to 12th century materials. If it worked, it could terrify Saladin's forces. If it failed, it might undermine his reforms. Anselm struck a flint, igniting the rags. The tubes flared, and with a sputter, 5 arrows launched, arcing into the sky before crashing into a wooden target 100 paces away, the pitch igniting small fires. The 6th tube misfired, bursting with a hiss, scattering embers. The knights cheered, but Jocelyn scoffed. "A toy, sire, not a weapon," he muttered. Ethan's jaw tightened beneath the mask. "A beginning," he countered. "Refine the tubes, use metal next time. This will grow." The test was promising, but the misfire highlighted the need for better craftsmanship. His mind raced to other technologies: windmills to harness coastal winds for milling or water pumping, and latrines to curb disease among the militia. Sanitation could save lives, freeing men for war. Windmills could support new settlements. He'd task Anselm with sketches tomorrow. The celebration was cut short by a scout's breathless report. Saladin's forces had launched a larger raid near Gaza, 1,000 men testing the new Montgisard fortress and militia, a journey of some 3 days ride south from Jerusalem under normal conditions, though the rugged terrain and Ethan's frail state would stretch it to 4. Ethan's heart sank, his reforms faced their first real trial. Despite his fever, he mounted a litter, rallying 200 knights and the Gaza militia to ride south, a grueling trek that would take 4 days with frequent rests to spare his worsening condition. Balian protested, but Ethan's voice was firm. "I lead, or they doubt me." The journey was agonizing, each jolt of the litter intensifying his pain over the 4-day trek from Jerusalem to Gaza, a distance of about 75 miles through rocky hills and desert paths. At Gaza, the fortress's walls, bolstered by the pulley system, stood firm after 3 days of construction progress, its trebuchet hurling stones that shattered an Ayyubid advance. The militia, trained in spear and bow, held the line after a day of fierce fighting, their discipline a testament to Ethan's program. He directed from the ramparts, a day after arriving, Baldwin's strategies guiding his commands, his modern tweak of archers on the flanks turning the tide. The raiders retreated after losing 200 men, but the cost was 50 militia lives. Ethan's leadership shone, but his fever worsened, his vision blurring as he collapsed into the litter for the 4-day return journey to Jerusalem. Back in the capital, a storm brewed in the court. Sibylla and Raymond had rallied barons during Ethan's absence, drafting a petition to limit his radical reforms, militias, machines, and fortress expansions, citing his health and the church's unease. Jocelyn presented it during a council meeting, his voice dripping with false concern. "Sire, the barons fear your burden is too great. We propose a regency under Raymond to guide these changes." Ethan's blood boiled, Baldwin's memories fueling his response. "You question God's will," he rasped, rising with effort after the exhausting return. "Montgisard, Gaza, my leadership saved us. The militia held, the trebuchet struck. This petition is your ambition, not the kingdoms. Withdraw it, or face my judgment, Sibylla interjected, her voice smooth. Brother, we seek stability. Your health, my health led us to victory, Ethan cut in, his eyes blazing. Support me, or the court will see your treachery. The hall fell silent. Raymond silenced the tacit admission of guilt. The petition was withdrawn, but the tension lingered, a powder keg awaiting a spark in his chambers. Ethan collapsed, his body racked with pain from the journey and battle. Gerard applied a new mixture, chamomile, aloe, and a trace of sulfur from a captured text, a risky experiment to combat infection. The sting was sharp, but Ethan clung to it, his modern knowledge pushing for innovation. As the fever burned, he reflected, was he Ethan, dreaming of windmills and sanitation, or Baldwin, bound by duty? The line blurred, his identity a battlefield of its own. A scout's final report confirmed Saladin's forces withdrawing to Egypt, a journey of some 10 days across the Sinai, but their probes would return. Ethan's reforms, fortresses, trebuchets, the hwachas, militia, were taking hold, but the court's defiance and his health threatened all. He'd order windmill designs for Jaffa tomorrow, sanitation plans for Jerusalem. With each breath, he fought to save Jerusalem, and himself, against a tide of history and flesh. Chapter 16, Mold and Might, Treachery Unveiled. The morning sun filtered through the narrow windows of Ethan's chambers in Jerusalem, casting shadows over a cluttered table strewn with parchments and a newly arrived stack of Arabic medical texts from Saladin's captured supplies. Ethan, as King Baldwin IV, sat hunched over them, his silver mask hiding the exhaustion etched into his face. His leprosy had worsened, new lesions spreading across his arms despite the chamomile aloe sulfur mixture Brother Gerard applied daily. The fever lingered, dulled only by willow bark tea, and the 4-day journey to Gaza had left his body frail. Yet Baldwin's memories urged him to act, and a flicker of modern knowledge sparked a daring idea. Could molds, like those that birthed penicillin centuries later, combat his disease? Ethan flipped through the texts, his bandaged fingers tracing descriptions of fungal remedies. He recalled a history podcast mentioning how ancient healers used moldy bread to treat infections, a precursor to penicillin's discovery in 1928. Leprosy wasn't bacterial in the same way, but his 21st century mind wondered if mold's antifungal properties might slow its progression. Bread left in damp conditions could grow penicillium molds, available in Jerusalem's humid storerooms. He ordered Gerard to experiment, culturing molds on damp bread in a sealed jar, to be tested on a small lesion in a week. The risk was high, but desperation drove him. Could heat from forges enhance the mold's effect? He jotted a note to explore this, clinging to hope. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Balian of Ibelin entered, bearing a sealed letter. Sire, an envoy from Byzantium brings word from Emperor Manuel I. Ethan broke the seal, reading, to King Baldwin, your terms are accepted, quarter-of-acres port revenues and a minor relic for 600 cataphracts and 10 ships. May our alliance shield the Holy Land. Relief washed over him. The Byzantine force, a 5-day journey by sea from Constantinople to Acre, would arrive in 2 weeks, bolstering Jerusalem's defenses against Saladin. He sent orders to prepare Acre's harbor, a day's ride north from Jerusalem. The day's triumphs continued at Montgisard, where Ethan oversaw the refined hwachas prototype. After the misfire, Anselm had crafted metal tubes, reinforcing the cart with iron. Ethan, despite his frailty, rode the 3-day journey north, resting frequently, to witness the test. Anselm lit the fuses, and this time, all 6 tubes fired, launching oil-soaked arrows 200 paces, igniting a target in a burst of flame. The knights roared, Odo de St. Ammon nodding approval, though Jocelyn's scowl persisted. A weapon at last, Ethan said, his voice raspy. Build 10 for Montgisard and Gaza. Train the militia to use them. The success bolstered his credibility, and he envisioned windmills for Jaffa's coast and latrines for Jerusalem streets, sketching plans during the return journey. But the horizon darkened with the scouts' report. Saladin's scouts, a 3-day ride from the Sinai, had increased activity near Jerusalem, probing the southern roads. The militia, now 600 strong, patrolled the outskirts, a day's march from the city, but Ethan ordered reinforcements to Gaza, a 4-day trek, and Montgisard, reinforcing the fortresses with trebuchets and hwachas. The threat loomed, a 10-day journey for Saladin's main force if they marched from Egypt. In the court, treachery festered beyond the initial sabotage plot. Sibylla and Raymond, emboldened by the Gaza raid's cost, had expanded their schemes with growing excitement. Beyond planning to weaken Montgisard's walls during construction, a 3-day ride from Jerusalem, they conspired with eager grins to bribe garrison commanders at Gaza to open the gates during a future siege, a 4-day journey south, to forge letters implicating Ethan in treason to turn the Templars against him, to poison key supply lines to Acre, a day's ride north, and to incite a baronial revolt in Galilee, a 2-day ride north. Raymond's eyes gleamed as he outlined the revolt, his voice rising with anticipation, while Sibylla nodded enthusiastically, her fingers tracing the forged letters. Jocelyn and several barons, including the Lord of Hebron, aided them, meeting in secret to draft these plans. Ethan, tipped off by a loyal squire who overheard the meetings, acted swiftly. That night, he led Balian and a dozen trusted knights to a shadowed hall where Sibylla, Raymond, Jocelyn, and the conspirators gathered. Bursting in, Ethan caught them mid-discussion, parchments of forged letters, bribe agreements, poison plans, and revolt strategy scattered on the table. "Treason," he roared, his voice cutting through their stunned silence. "You plot my downfall and Jerusalem's ruin." Sibylla paled, Raymond's excited grin faded, but Ethan's guards moved first. The conspirators were seized, their weapons confiscated. Ethan, his fever flaring, ordered their arrest. "Take them to rooms befitting their station, comfortable but guarded," he commanded. Sibylla was confined to a well-furnished chamber in the palace tower, her son Baldwin IV torn from her arms and placed under Balian as a ward to secure the royal line. Raymond was held in a similar suite in the citadel, both stripped of all titles and powers. Jocelyn and the barons were held in separate quarters, their lands revoked and redistributed. Balian received Hebron's estates, and loyal knights like the Lord of Sidon gained smaller fiefs, while Ethan retained Nablus's rich lands and claimed Raymond's extensive Tripoli holdings for himself, consolidating his power. The trials began the next day in the Great Hall, a somber affair under the gaze of the court. Ethan presided, his voice weak but resolute, supported by Balian and Odo. Sibylla, veiled and defiant, faced charges of inciting revolt and forgery, her pleas of familial loyalty dismissed as evidence of her forged letters, complete with her seal, was presented, her wails for her son ignored. Raymond, still carrying a trace of his earlier excitement now turned to defiance, was accused of bribery and sabotage, his defense crumbling under testimony from bribed commanders who confessed under threat of torture, their voices trembling as they recounted his eager promises. Jocelyn, sweating and stammering, admitted to rallying barons, his role as coordinator exposed by intercepted letters. The Lord of Hebron, pale and silent, offered no defense, his signature on poison and bribe documents sealing his fate. The verdicts were swift. Sibylla was sentenced to lifelong confinement, her powers and lands stripped, her room a gilded cage, her son now Balian's ward. Raymond, deemed too dangerous, faced death alongside Jocelyn and the Lord of Hebron. The executions followed at dawn on the city's eastern gate. The Lord of Hebron, a burly man with a scarred face, was first, bound to a post as the executioner. A hulking figure in black raised his axe. The blade fell with a sickening thud, severing the baron's head in a single blow, blood spraying onto the cobblestones as the crowd gasped, some turning away. The head rolled into a basket, eyes still wide with shock, while his body slumped, twitching briefly. Raymond, his defiance unbroken, stepped forward next, his head held high, the axe descended, and his head toppled with a wet crunch, blood pooling as the crowd murmured, "His Tripoli lands now Ethan's." Jocelyn, trembling and pale, was last, his neck stretched on the block, the axe fell, and his head rolled, the executions lasting from sunrise to mid-morning, the air thick with a metallic scent of blood and the weight of fear alone. That night, Ethan's health crisis deepened. The sulfur mixture stung, offering no relief, and his reflection in a polished shield showed Baldwin's mask, not Ethan's face. Was he losing himself? The mold experiment began, Gerard culturing green molds on damp bread, to be tested in a week. Ethan's modern mind pushed for innovation. Could forged heat sterilize the mold application? He'd explore it, desperate to save himself. The Byzantine alliance, hwachas success, and crush plot were gains, but Saladin's scouts and his health threatened all. Ethan adjusted his mask, his resolve hardening. Windmills and sanitation would follow, but first, he'd fortify Jerusalem against a coming storm, a king forged in treachery and disease. Chapter 17, Order and Renewal, Wealth and Innovation. The Great Hall of Jerusalem thrummed with an uneasy silence as the morning sun of July 16, 1177, illuminated the gathered nobles. Ethan, as King Baldwin IV, sat upon the throne, his silver mask concealing the sting of his worsening leprosy, new lesions creeping up his neck despite the chamomile aloe sulfur mixture. The fever had subsided slightly with willow bark tea, but the 4-day journey to Gaza lingered in his bones. The recent trials and executions of Raymond, Jocelyn, and the Lord of Hebron had reshaped the court, and today, he would address the aftermath. Baldwin's memories guided his authority, while his modern mind pushed for innovation, sanitation, bathhouses, farming reforms, and economic growth through a printing press for Bibles and a Templar-inspired banking system. Alongside the ongoing mold experiments to save himself, the court was a fractured mosaic. Sibylla, confined to her tower chamber, had lost her son Baldwin IV to Balian's wardship, a move that silenced her influence. Her absence left a void, with barons vying for favor. Balian, now holding Hebron's estates and guarding the young heir, stood as Ethan's staunchest ally, his presence a stabilizing force. Odo de Saint-Amand, leader of the Templars, eyed the power shift warily, his order's loyalty secured by the hwachas' success but tested by the executions. The Lord of Sidon, enriched with redistributed lands, pledged fealty, while lesser nobles whispered of opportunity, their alliances fluid. Ethan called the assembly to order, his voice raspy but firm. The traitors are gone, their lands redistributed to loyal houses. Jerusalem stands united, or it will. Balian stepped forward, his tone measured. Sire, the barons seek clarity. Some fear your rule grows too harsh, others see strength. Baldwin V's wardship under me ensures stability, but tensions linger. Ethan nodded, noting the glances toward the empty seats once held by Raymond and Jocelyn. He announced new councils, Balian to oversee military, Odo for logistics, and the Lord of Sidon for trade, binding their interests to his. The hall murmured approval, though a few barons exchanged guarded looks, hinting at future intrigue turning to technological, agricultural, and economic expansion. Ethan acted on his modern vision. The success of the hwachas and fortresses had proven his innovations, and now he targeted cleanliness, food security, and economic growth. In Jerusalem's crowded streets, filth bred disease, weakening his militia. He ordered the creation of street sweepers, teams of laborers with brooms and carts to clear dirt and refuse daily, starting in the city center and expanding outward over a week. The 3-day ride to Jaffa would see similar efforts, with plans to train locals there. Next, he tasked Anselm with designing bathhouses, inspired by Roman and Arabic models, simple structures with heated stone floors and water channels, fueled by forges. Sketches began for a pilot near the citadel, a day's work to draft, with construction to start in a month, contingent on stone from Mount Gisard, a 3-day journey beyond sanitation. Ethan addressed farming. The canals, now irrigating fields in Jaffa and Acre, and the planned windmills for milling and water pumping, needed a system to sustain yields. Drawing from medieval crop rotation knowledge, he introduced a 3-field system, 1 field for wheat, 1 for legumes like lentils, and 1 fallow, rotating annually. He summoned village elders from Jaffa. A 3-day ride, to implement this in the irrigated lands, starting with a pilot plot near Jerusalem. The windmills, once built, would grind surplus grain, and the legumes would enrich the soil, boosting food for the militia and towns. Overseers were dispatched that day, a week's work to organize concern with the economy, trade disrupted by war and the execution's fallout. Ethan turned to innovation. He envisioned a printing press to produce books, especially Bibles, for sale, inspired by Gutenberg's later invention but adapted with the wood blocks and ink from local markets. He sketched a design for a press to print illuminated manuscripts, aiming to sell them to pilgrims and churches, with a prototype planned in a month. More ambitiously, he considered a banking system, inspired by the Templars' secure deposit and loan network. That afternoon, he convened his economic advisors, merchants from Acre, a day's ride north, and a scribe, in his chambers. "We need wealth to sustain this," he said, his voice strained. "A press for Bibles to sell, and a banking system. How should we implement it based on the Templar model? Start with Jerusalem, then branches in Acre, Jaffa, and Europe, Constantinople, Venice, Paris, over years." The merchants debated, suggesting strongholds for safes and courier networks, the scribe estimating profits from pilgrim deposits across a 5-day sea journey to Constantinople. Ethan listened, his mind racing with secure vaults and trade routes, a vision to rival Saladin's resources. The mold experiments, his personal hope, progressed in his chambers. Gerard tended jars of damp bread, green penicillium mold sprouting after 3 days. Ethan, recalling penicillin's origins, instructed Gerard to apply a small sample to a lesion on his arm, monitoring for changes over a week. The sting was sharp, but he endured it, wondering if heat from a forge could enhance its effect. He ordered a low-flame test, the process ongoing as he balanced hope and skepticism. His reflection in a polished shield showed Baldwin's mask, his identity blurring, Ethan's dreams of a quiet life fading into the king's duty. A scout's report interrupted his thoughts. Saladin, after the recent losses near Gaza, was consolidating his forces in Egypt, tending to over 200 wounded and resupplying depleted ranks. The defeat had fractured his coalition, forcing a year-long effort to regroup and rebuild, delaying any major move from his base, a 10-day march from Egypt. His scouts, a 3-day ride from the Sinai, continued patrols but lacked the strength for an immediate strike. The Byzantine cataphracts and ships, a 5-day sea journey to Acre, were due in a week, their arrival a day's ride north critical. Ethan ordered the militia, now 700 strong, to reinforce Gaza, a 4-day trek, and Mount Gisard, ensuring hwachas and trebuchets were ready. Though the delay offered a rare respite that evening, the court's aftermath weighed on him. Balian reported whispers of a new faction forming among minor barons, unsettled by the executions and land shifts. Ethan's consolidation of Nablus and Raymond's Tripoli lands, vast holdings a day's ride apart, had enriched him but fueled envy. He summoned Balian and Odo, planning to integrate the Byzantine force into southern defense once they arrived, a strategy to be finalized in 3 days. The bathhouse designs, street sweepers, crop rotation, and economic initiatives, he hoped, would win public and noble support. Countering dissent alone, Ethan adjusted his mask, the mold patch itching on his arm. The experiments, sanitation, farming reforms, economic plans, and fortifications were his legacy, but Saladin's year-long delay and the court's unrest shaped his next moves. He was Baldwin IV, Ethan Caldwell, a king forging a future against disease and betrayal. Chapter 18, Ink and Earth, Foundations of Prosperity. The morning sun of July 23, 1177, cast long shadows across the courtyard of Jerusalem's citadel as King Baldwin IV, convened his council. His silver mask hid the worsening leprosy, lesions now brushing his jawline despite the chamomile aloe sulfur mixture, while willow bark tea dulled the fever from his recent 4-day journey to Gaza. The mold experiments, ongoing for a week, showed no change yet, the green patch on his arm itching under Gerard's watchful eye. Baldwin's memories steadied his resolve, but Ethan's modern mind drove a new venture, a paper mill to support his printing press and economic growth. The court's unrest, Byzantine arrival, and farming progress demanded attention, shaping his legacy against disease and betrayal. The court remained a tense web. The minor baron faction, led by the Lord of Caesarea, grew bolder, their whispers of a coup fueled by envy over Ethan's control of Nablus and Tripoli lands, a day's ride apart. Balian, guardian of young Baldwin V, reported their meetings in Galilee, a 2-day ride north, urging vigilance. Odo de Saint-Amand, loyal but cautious, reinforced Templar patrols, while the Lord of Sidon pushed for trade gains. Ethan addressed the council, his voice hoarse. We strengthen Jerusalem from within. The traitor's fall was just, now, we build. The hall nodded, though Caesarea's glare hinted at defiance that afternoon. Ethan turned to his latest innovation, a paper mill. Recalling 15th-century European methods, he envisioned a facility to produce paper for his Bible printing press, reducing costs and boosting trade. He summoned Anselm and a team of craftsmen, outlining the process. First, they needed raw materials, rags from local markets, linen from Jaffa, a 3-day ride, and water from the city's wells. He ordered a survey of the Kidron Valley, a day's ride east, for a mill site with a reliable stream. Next, he tasked laborers with building a wooden frame structure, estimating a month for construction using timber from Mount Gisard, a 3-day journey. Inside, they'd install a water wheel, powered by the stream, to drive a stamping mill, iron hammers to pulp the rags, forged locally over 2 weeks. Alkaline ash from bakeries and lime from Acre, a day's ride north, would treat the pulp, with vats for soaking and screens for pressing sheets, a process refined over a month's trials. He allocated funds from his Tripoli revenues, planning production to start in 3 months, with exports to Acre and Europe. 5-day sea journey to Constantinople, to follow economic progress bolstered his plan. The printing press prototype, nearing completion after a month, showed promise, wood blocks carved with the Bible text, ink tested on parchment. Merchants from Acre reported interest from pilgrims, projecting sales to fund a bank. The banking system, based on Templar models, Advance as advisors suggested strongholds in Jerusalem and Acre for deposits, with couriers to Jaffa and European branches, Constantinople, Venice, Paris over years. The scribe estimated a year to establish secure vaults, using local stone. Street sweepers, active for a week, cleared Jerusalem streets, with Jaffa's teams training, improving public health and merchant access. Bathhouse construction near the citadel began, stone arriving from Mount Gisard, with heated floors planned in a month. Farming thrived. The crop rotation pilot near Jerusalem, started a week ago, showed early legume growth, enriching soil for wheat next season. Canals in Jaffa and Acre, a 3-day and 1-day ride respectively, irrigated fields, while windmill designs progressed, their milling capacity to start in 2 months. Village elders reported higher yields, feeding the militia and towns, with surplus for trade. A scout confirmed Saladin's year-long consolidation in Egypt, his forces licking wounds from Gaza's losses, a 10-day march delayed. His scouts, a 3-day ride from the Sinai, monitored but posed no threat. The Byzantine cataphracts and ships, arrived a day's ride north at Acre after a 5-day sea journey, brought 600 men and 10 vessels. Ethan met their commander that day, planning their integration into Gaza's defense, a 4-day trek, to be finalized in a week. That evening, the mold experiment's lack of progress worried him. The heat test with a forge flame showed no change, and his reflection in the shield revealed Baldwin's mask, not Ethan's face. Was his identity slipping? Balian's warning of Caesarea's faction loomed, but the paper mill, economic gains, and farming success offered hope. He adjusted his mask, determined to fortify Jerusalem against intrigue and disease. Chapter 19, Quiet Seeds, Deeper Roots. The late July wind brought the scent of dust and lavender across the hills of Jerusalem, carrying with it the soft creak of scaffolding from the Kidron Valley below. The paper mill's frame stood taller now, sturdy beams from Mount Gisard locked in place, a wide trench dug for the channel that would power the water wheel. Masons chipped stone for the mill race, and Anselm oversaw the ironmongers as they shaped the first stamping hammers. Ethan, cloaked against the morning chill, stood with Balian on a parapet overlooking the work. The wheel should turn in a week, Balian said, shielding his eyes. Your plans are catching. Ethan nodded, grateful for the distraction from his throbbing arm. Beneath the linen bandages, the mold patch had changed. What had once been an itchy smear of green now showed subtle rings of blue-gray at the edges. Gerard had scraped a sample onto parchment and left it near a freshly boiled cloth. By morning, the bacteria there had thinned slightly. It's beginning to react, Ethan murmured. To heat? Balian asked, brow raised. Maybe. Or air. Or the oils from our skin, Ethan said. But something's changed. Gerard had been cautious, almost reverent, treating the mold sample like a relic. It was too early to celebrate, but Ethan allowed himself a breath of hope. If it worked, if it could be replicated, then this kingdom might outlast not only Saladin but time itself. He turned to Balian. Speaking of what outlasts us, I want to talk about Nablus. Balian straightened, sensing the shift in tone. I've held that land long enough, Ethan continued. It's vital ground, fertile, well placed between trade routes. I need someone there I can trust. Someone who'll support these reforms, not just benefit from them. Who do you have in mind? Balian asked. I was hoping you might help me find someone. Balian hesitated. Someone loyal, but not too powerful exactly. A younger knight, maybe. With ambition, but the right kind. They stood in silence a moment. Below them, a cart rumbled down the hill, its cargo of rags and linen bound for the first pulp trial. Balian finally spoke. There's a man, Hugo de Blanchefort. Third son, no lands of his own, but he's taken to the crop rotation effort like a monk to prayer. He's clever, and his men respect him. Served in Mount Gisard. Lost 2 fingers to a Mamluk blade and didn't retreat. Ethan smiled under the mask. That sounds like someone who understands the value of planting roots. I'll bring him to you this week, Balian said. But if you give him Nablus, you make him powerful. Good, Ethan replied. Let's see what someone does with power when given a vision to serve. Later that day, in the cool shadow of the press room near the Citadel's old armory, Ethan inspected the first paper test. The fibers were coarse but held ink well. The press crew had used a woodcut of the Beatitudes, a modest beginning, but clear. They laid it beside a scrap of parchment for comparison. It was lighter, cheaper, and cleaner. Anselm entered, a smudge of pulp on his brow. We'll have 10 sheets a day by week's end. 100, if the wheel holds. Keep at it, Ethan said. We're not just printing words, we're printing memory. Outside, children darted between street sweepers in the Holy Sepulchre quarter, laughing as water from a new cistern bubbled from the bronze lion's mouth. Merchants in Jaffa had begun requesting the street cleaning model, offering salted fish and linen in barter. One had even drawn a crude sketch of a bathhouse. Asking if it could be replicated. Everything was spreading, quietly, like a seed taking root in good soil. That night, Ethan returned to his chamber, weary. Gerard checked the mold again, murmuring to himself as he compared it to the control samples. It was growing differently now. Slower, but sharper. "Defined, you may be onto something, sire," the physician said. "It doesn't kill yet, but it defends. Whatever it is, it's not just rot." Ethan closed his eyes, letting the pain drift beneath the surface like stones in a riverbed. "No," he said. "It's the beginning of something else outside." The stars hung heavy over Jerusalem, and the moon lit the scaffolded bones of a paper mill that would change the world. Chapter 20, A Cure in the Pulp. August's first sunrise struck the limestone walls of Jerusalem in copper hues, drawing long shadows across the mill in the Kidron Valley. The water will turned for the first time just before the bells of Lauds, creaking as the stream's narrow flow caught the scooped paddles. Apprentices cheered. The hammers, suspended by notch camshafts, began their rhythmic fall, thud, 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 pumping soaked linen into fibrous mash in a stone basin, where it would soak with lye and ash. Ethan stood nearby, leaning against a cane Anselm had crafted for him. The cane's head was a simple bronze cross, more a counterweight than a symbol of power. His left arm, wrapped in a clean linen sleeve, throbbed less now. Gerard had applied a second solution, boiled from bark, mixed with wine and a paste of crushed citrus peel, and the strange mold patch on his skin seemed to stop spreading. Under the magnifier lens, the filaments twisted slowly around flecks of dead skin, forming a strange, translucent crust containment, Gerard said that morning. "It's no cure, but it fences the fire." Ethan had nodded. It was enough for now. Later that day, back within the old audience hall, Balian arrived with a man they had discussed. Sir Hugo de Blanchefort. He was younger than Ethan expected, no more than 25, with a lean, sinewy build from campaign life and sun-darkened skin that suggested long marches, not courtly feasts. His left hand bore a leather cap over two missing fingers. He wore no ornament, only a faded surcoat with the faint remains of his family's silver crane crest. He knelt, silent, until Ethan gestured for him to rise. "You served at Montgisard?" Ethan asked, voice low from fatigue. "I did, Majesty. Under Sir Godfrey de Montferrat. I carried messages and held the line when he fell." Balian spoke quietly behind Ethan. "He didn't retreat when the line broke. Pulled 3 men to safety before taking a javelin to the thigh." Ethan studied the young man. There was something in Hugo's eyes, not hunger for land, but the wary alertness of someone used to surviving between greater powers. "I have need of such men," Ethan said. "Nablus is a vital region. Too many. It is a prize. I see it as a responsibility." Hugo didn't answer at first. When he did, it was slow and careful. "If I take it, I serve your peace," he said. "Not just your banners." Ethan smiled under the mask. "That's precisely the oath I want to hear." The agreement was sealed with a silver ring etched with a Jerusalem cross, placed in Hugo's hand. Within a month, he would ride to Nablus with 15 engineers and 2 scribes, there to oversee the introduction of improved plow designs, irrigation reforms, and the establishment of a second granary. As the paper mill's pulp fermented and the first paper sheets dried across cedar frames, Ethan turned his attention to the printing press. The prototype, still operated by a team of 3, produced only 5 pages per hour, each laid carefully on drying racks near the bathhouse. The pages bore a Latin version of the Sermon on the Mount, woodcut letters, reversed and carved by local Armenian craftsmen under Ethan's guidance. Each page required precise inking with a hand roller made of wrapped wool dipped in soot-based ink. They weren't perfect, smudges, faded lines, and slightly uneven impressions abounded, but it was undeniably printed text. Merchants from Acre who had seen the sheets were stunned. "Books, like bread," one whispered. Running his fingers over the paper as if it might vanish, Ethan had nodded. "Cheaper than parchment, durable enough to last seasons, and copied in days, not decades." The first complete test, 8 pages sewn between thin wooden covers, was sent with a courier toward Constantinople, hidden in a sack of dye samples. Another would leave for Venice by sea in 2 weeks. A third remained in Ethan's study. Meanwhile, Gerard continued his experiments. The mold now grew best at body temperature. Kept in a warm clay jar near the forge, it produced the strongest reactions. He had begun testing it against old wounds taken from injured soldiers, packing bits of mold paste into gauze, placing it over infected scrapes. Within 2 days, swelling lessened. Pus-dried, he brought Ethan the results in a small wooden box lined with wool. Inside, 3 slivers of dried mold sat beside notes written in Latin and Arabic. "We may need more linen," he said, almost sheepish. "And more wounds." Ethan gave a tired chuckle. Unfortunately, war is always generous in those they would need to be careful. If the mold worked, it had to be managed, not worshipped. He remembered how antibiotics, in his time, had been overused and abused. But here, now, it was a miracle in a jar. By mid-August, the streets of Jerusalem had changed. Sweeping teams now operated on a schedule. Refuse bins lined market corners. Bathhouse stones were heated with coal and wood from Mount Gisard, their vents tested by Cistercian architects. Cleanliness began to shape trade. Merchants reported faster movement through Jaffa, more coin exchanging hands an acre. Even the city's smell changed, less rot, more dust, clay, and warm stone. The paper mill produced 40 sheets a day. The press ran at dawn and dusk. And Hugo, now in Nablus, sent his first message back on a card of barley. "The people work. They listen. The priests complain, but the fields are full." That night, Ethan sat beneath an oil lamp in his chamber, mask off, heat rising gently from a brazier. He held a single page in his hand, his own writing, printed by his press. It read, "To build is to remember. To remember is to resist forgetting. And memory, written and shared, is a fortress stronger than stone." He set it aside, let his eyes fall shut, and felt, if only for a moment, not like a sick man hiding in a dead king's body, but a builder laying down the first stones of a new world. Chapter 21, The Book of Peter's Throne. The midday sun struck the western ramparts with silver light, and the mill in the Kidron Valley echoed with a slow, wet rhythm of pounding hammers. Paper, real paper, was being made by the hands of men who had never seen a book that wasn't bound in calfskin. Each day brought a few dozen more pages drying on stretched cloth frames, rough-edged but increasingly uniform. Jerusalem's people had begun calling the place the reigning house, for the gentle dripping of pulp water from its stone basins inside the citadel. Ethan sat at a high table scattered with vellum, sketches, and early test prints. His mask was off, resting beside a bowl of lukewarm wine vinegar where he soaked his arm twice a day. The mold no longer spread. It didn't retreat, either, but Gerard believed it was stabilizing, forming a faint, lichen-like barrier that seemed to resist other infections. A test applied to a wounded soldier near Gaza had shown promise. The fever dropped after 2 days. One more step forward, but a problem had been gnawing at him all week, not one of logistics or medicine, but of legitimacy. All his changes, his roads, his laws, his press, even his paper, were fragile without spiritual backing. The Pope had remained silent. Rome had sent no letters, no legates, no condemnation, but no blessing either. Ethan knew enough of history to understand the risk. If Rome viewed him as a heretic, the entire kingdom of Jerusalem could fall from grace, or worse, be declared illegitimate. His nobles would abandon him. The orders might splinter. Even Acre's merchants would reconsider their support if they feared excommunication. He needed the Pope. And not just as a passive ally. He needed active recognition. A statement that the King of Jerusalem, even one hiding behind a silver mask, still ruled with heaven's favor. So Ethan conceived of a gift. Not a letter, not coin, something greater, a Bible, but not any Bible. A printed Bible, yes, but also illuminated, glorified, and magnificent, one that bore the soul of a scriptorium and the ambition of a kingdom reborn. Something worthy of a pope's hand. He would call it Liber Throni Petri, the Book of Peter's Throne. That evening, he summoned Anselm and the press foreman to his solar. They stood amid scattered diagrams and woodblock sketches as Ethan explained. "This won't be like the others," Ethan said, gesturing to a page drying beside a candle flame. "We'll print only 20 total. But one must be so beautiful that it silences any suspicion. The Pope must look upon it and see not just Scripture, but Jerusalem itself. Our purpose, our discipline, our glory." He turned to Anselm. "That one copy may take half a year to finish." Anselm raised an eyebrow. 6 months, perhaps more. "The printing is the easy part." They would print in batches, each page examined, trimmed, then passed to teams of artisans, gold leaf specialists, miniature painters, border illustrators, scribes trained to highlight capital letters in precious pigment. The book's binding would be a labor of love, cedar board soaked in oil, wrapped in dyed leather, and clasped shut with gilded bronze. Ethan envisioned tiny enamel inlays of saints and the 4 evangelists on the corners, and the center a polished glass cabochon, ringed in lapis. "Will print the Latin Vulgate text, but only after finalizing every block. No errors. No shortcuts, Ethan said. It must read as if written by the hand of angels, not machines. The artisans understood. This was more than a commission. It was a diplomatic weapon cloaked in sanctity. As word spread of the Liber Throni Petri, momentum grew around it. Gerard sent for ink specialists in Acre to begin refining color-fast pigments, deep crimson from cochineal, blue from crushed lapis imported via Tripoli, and green from verdigris. Ethan insisted on gold leaf gilding not just for illustrations but also for the page borders on the first Gospel and final Revelation. Each page would bear the royal seal, a crowned Jerusalem cross with a tiny press carved beneath it, a quiet symbol, and a loud message. You'll need scribes of high skill, Balian warned him. The Pope won't tolerate a smudged. Amenethan had already recruited 2 Armenians, 1 Greek monk, and a Jewish calligrapher from Tiberias. They worked in shifts, applying color and detail by hand, just 1 column of decoration per day. The printing blocks themselves took nearly a week to cut per Gospel, and Ethan demanded tests for alignment, clarity, and where before full runs at the current pace. The first Gospel, Matthew, would be finished in full form within a month. The complete Bible, nearly 800 pages, would not be done for many more, and that was exactly what Ethan wanted. Time bought legitimacy. If rumors reached Rome of a magnificent, Pope-bound Bible printed in Jerusalem, if bishops heard that it bore the Latin Vulgate, bound in purple leather, written by Catholic hands, then Ethan wouldn't need to argue for his reforms. He would let beauty and piety argue for him. Back in the mill, the pace had slowed. Only 30 sheets a day now went toward the Pope's Bible. Each was selected from a dozen. Any wrinkle or pulp bubble rendered it unworthy. Apprentices laid them between wool felt and pressed them under stones, then cured them near the new hypocaust under the bathhouse floor. Anselm carved his 4th Gospel title block, Johannes, into walnut. It would take another 2 weeks to test, ink, and set. Ethan often visited late at night, watching the candlelight reflect off the drying racks like stars laid flat on the earth. Sometimes, he would run his gloved fingers over a page and imagine it resting in Rome, on silk cloth before the Pope, sunlight falling through the Sistine windows, cardinals leaning in, eyes wide. And when the Pope turned that page, he would see not just scripture, but the birth of something new. One evening, Balian found Ethan overlooking the Kidron Valley, his cloak wrapped against the gathering wind. The legate in Acre has agreed to meet. He's cautious, but curious. Ethan nodded. Good. I want him to see the work in progress, and after that, we send him back with 1 Gospel, finely bound. Let him carry word to Rome, that the King of Jerusalem writes with iron and prayer. Like Balian hesitated. If the Pope refuses to respond, Ethan didn't answer at first. He looked to the west, toward the sea. Then we keep building, he said. Not for permission. For permanence. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22, Cloaks and Crosses. The legate from Rome arrived under an overcast sky, his party of 15 riders cutting a clean line through the Jaffa Gate as the city watched in silence. Their cloaks bore the sigil of the papal keys embroidered in red and gold, the white banner of the Holy See fluttering behind them. They carried no weapons, only ceremonial staves and an air of sanctified suspicion. They had taken nearly 2 weeks to reach Jerusalem from Acre, slowed not by road or weather, but by deliberation. The man at their center, Cardinal Otto di Castellari, Bishop of Tivoli and personal envoy of His Holiness Alexander III, was no stranger to diplomacy. A canon lawyer by training, he had served during the Schism years, argued before kings, and once presided over the burning of a heretical monk outside Toulouse. He had seen many kinds of kings. He had not seen one who printed books. The receiving hall had been emptied of courtiers by Ethan's order. Only Balian, Gerard, and Anselm stood behind the throne, each dressed formally but plainly. The air held a smell of olive oil and warm iron, the byproduct of presswork carried up from the lower halls. The banners of Jerusalem, the Templars, and the Holy Sepulchre hung from the rafters. Ethan sat on the throne beneath a high-arched window, his silver mask polished to a dull gleam. He wore a deep blue mantle lined with Tyrian purple, both to echo imperial dignity and hide his trembling hands. His arms still ached from the mold scab, now a sealed patch under bandage and resin. He had fasted the night before, not from piety, but to clear his mind. As the cardinal entered, Ethan rose with effort, placing one gloved hand on the arm of the throne for balance. Your Eminence, he rasped. Jerusalem welcomes you. Cardinal Otto bowed low, Lower than expected, Your Grace. Rome watches with interest and, we hope, understanding. The meeting began not with politics, but liturgy. Ethan had arranged for a sung vespers in the Latin rite, held in the restored chapel of St. Anne. The choir was composed of local monks, trained in Roman chant, and the service included a reading from Matthew, the same gospel Ethan had prepared as the first printed offering. When the cantor recited the Beatitudes in slow, careful Latin, Cardinal Otto closed his eyes. Afterward, they retired to a smaller audience chamber off the cloister garden. Candlelight danced against whitewashed walls, and mulled wine was served in plain bronze cups. Ethan gestured toward a flat cedar box, brought in by Anselm and laid upon the table. Inside, nestled in wool and lined with red cloth, was the first finished copy of the Gospel of Matthew, part of the in-progress Liber Throni Petri. Cardinal Otto examined it in silence. The leather binding was soft, dyed purple with gold-trimmed edges. Brass corner plates bore the crests of the evangelists. He ran his fingers along the gold-leafed border and turned the page carefully. The Latin was crisp, printed with uniform type, each heading illuminated by hand in scarlet and lapis. The capital B of Beatty Potpier's Spiritu took up half the page, filled with vines, fish, and tiny angels in flight. This is not scribed, Otto said finally. No, Ethan replied. It is printed. The cardinal did not look up. I have seen broadsheets in Venice. Letters from bishops. But never scripture. I have printed only 20 copies, Ethan said. One will go to Rome, others to bishops across the kingdom. It will not replace the sacred scribe, but it will share his burden. And whose idea was it to illuminate them in such fashion? Ethan inclined his head. Mine. Though Anselm and his men did the work. Cardinal Otto turned another page. The ink had no blotches. The margins were generous. A tiny Jerusalem cross had been pressed into the corner of each page. Tasteful, but present. Why? The cardinal asked simply. Ethan met his gaze. Because the word of God should not belong only to monks with 20 years of silence and candles at hand. A priest in Acre should preach from the same text as a bishop in Antioch. And the people, they should see the same words in every chapel, not the fragmented verses. Scribes have time to finish. He leaned forward slightly. This is not rebellion. This is reverence through order. The cardinal sat back, tapping the edge of the Gospel's wooden box. The Curia has long warned against the democratization of Scripture. Too many interpretations. Too many tongues. This is not the vernacular, Ethan said. It is the Vulgate? As St. Jerome wrote it. I have not changed a single word. Otto's expression was unreadable. Not yet. Ethan let the silence stretch. Then, he shifted to what mattered most. Your Eminence, he said carefully, you may have heard strange things from Acre. That the king of Jerusalem builds paper mills. That he opens bathhouses and cleans the city streets. That he sends physicians with herbs and powders and orders scribes to copy books by machine. I have, the cardinal said. And worse, that you believe in ideas that were condemned in Constantinople. That you walk the edge of heresy in the name of cleanliness. That your press is an engine of pride. Ethan didn't flinch. And what does your Eminence believe? Otto was quiet a moment. Then he said, I believe that God can act in strange times through stranger men. Ethan smiled behind the mask. Then let me show you what I've built. Not words. Stone and earth. Over the next 3 days, the legate was given a carefully curated tour. He visited the Kidron paper mill, where the water wheel turned in steady rhythm, feeding the pulping vats. He watched rag merchants bring in baskets of worn linen in exchange for copper. He inspected the printing press, its inking stations clean, its pages drying in orderly rows. Anselm showed him how the block letters were set and inked. He even let the cardinal press a single page of Luke with his own hands. Otto held it like it might catch fire. He toured a bathhouse, its heating system explained by a hospitaller engineer in Gerard's company. The marble was warm underfoot. The pool steamed gently. He walked through the streets of the lower quarter, where sweepers passed with carts and brooms, and bread sellers called out without stepping around dung piles. A child offered the cardinal a folded sheet of parchment. It bore a printed psalm and a hand-colored dove. Otto took it wordlessly. In the evenings, Ethan hosted quiet suppers. No feasts, no dancing. Just prayer, music, and long conversation. He spoke of hospitals, canals, and schools, not yet built, but imagined. On the 4th day, Cardinal Otto asked for a private meeting in the chapel of the Holy Sepulchre, beside the aedicule itself. The door was sealed. Only the two of them remained, seated near the stone slab where pilgrims wept and kissed the marble. The cardinal spoke first. You are not what we expected. The Curia was prepared to rebuke a mad king playing with forges and ink. And now, the cardinal said softly, we see a man with a disease, with a vision, and with tools none of us understand. Ethan nodded. I don't need the Pope to bless my lungs or my wounds. But I do need him to see that what I'm building will outlast me. Otto looked at him with something close to pity and respect. I cannot promise a letter from the Pope. But I will carry this gospel myself. I will place it on the altar in Rome. He touched the edge of Ethan's robe and I will tell him, Jerusalem lives. And perhaps, the Holy Spirit moves here. Still that night, Ethan stood alone on the ramparts. Below, the press worked by lantern light, preparing the second gospel. The wind tugged at his cloak. He felt the slow ache of fatigue pulling at his joints, but also the rising warmth of a plan unfolding. He didn't know what the Pope would decide. But now, he had a bridge to Rome, and the book of Peter's throne in motion, in ink, in light, in stone. Chapter 23, Mercy and Flesh. The morning came with the scent of olive oil and wood smoke drifting through the narrow arrow-slit window of Ethan's chambers. A sparrow sang beyond the courtyard, its note persistent and delicate, like a needle threading silence. Gerard entered quietly, as he did every day. The physician's movements were slower now, more deliberate, not out of fatigue, but reverence. Something had changed between them, not in words, but in posture, in the way Gerard washed his hands before touching Ethan's arm. Ethan sat upright, already unwrapping the linen from his forearm when Gerard knelt beside him. The cloth fell away with a faint sigh of dampness, revealing skin that only weeks ago had been pale, pocked, and senseless. Now, under the balm and mold, it was changing. The lesions no longer wept. The outer layer had turned dry, cracked, but beneath that, new skin. Thin, pinkish, but whole. The smell of rot was gone. The swelling in his wrist had reduced. He could feel the pressure of Gerard's thumb now, faint but present. Gerard exhaled audibly, his expression unreadable. Then he crossed himself. You see it too, Ethan said, voice low. Gerard didn't look up. It is not a matter of what I see. It is a matter of what I know. His hand trembled slightly as he dipped a linen square in cool water. You were not meant to recover. Not from this. No man is, and yet I am. The physician finally looked him in the eye. My lord, this is not a medicine. I understand. Mold does not heal. It spoils. It consumes unless it's used right, Ethan murmured, thinking of what he had once known, penicillin, spores, fermentation, but the words sounded hollow here. Medieval. Gerard pressed the linen gently to the healing flesh. No. This is not the craft of man. This is mercy. Undeserved, uncommanded mercy. He sat back on his heels. I have never seen a leper reverse his decay. I have studied wounds from Antioch to Acre. I watched monks rot while they still preached. But your hand tightens when it used to curl. Your fingers move again. Ethan flexed them. Slow. Stiff. But they moved. The lesions have not spread in 5 days, Gerard continued, as if counting prayers. The skin warms. Your breath is no longer labored. I still have it, Ethan said flatly. You know that. Yes. But I believe you have been spared from its sentence. Gerard looked toward the crucifix hanging near the window. God has not lifted your burden entirely, but he has lightened it. This is no simple healing. This is favor. Ethan rose slowly. His joints ached less than they had. The fever that clung to him for so many weeks had ebbed, retreating like a tide. He walked, barefoot, across the cool stone. You believe this is divine? I do. Why me? Gerard didn't answer immediately. Perhaps because you do not ask for it. That gave Ethan pause. He turned toward the light. The morning sun caught the edge of his silver mask, casting a soft gleam across the room. He had felt alone for months, caught between centuries, between memories, between bodies. But now something stirred. Not certainty, but change. Measured. Steady. A silence lifting. He sat again and let Gerard redress the arm. I want you to begin treating others, Ethan said. Gerard looked up sharply. You are the king. I'm also not the only one suffering. Start with those in the lepers' quarter outside the eastern gate. Use the same preparation. Clean linens. Molded rags. Rotate them daily. Gerard hesitated. They are already beyond what you are. Try anyway. They will say it is heresy. Let them. Ethan murmured. If God works through mold, then mold we will use. Gerard bowed his head. So be it. That night, alone, Ethan unwrapped the bandages himself. The firelight flickered off the mirror's bronze back, and when he lifted his arm to see, he did not flinch. The skin was real. Raw in places, yes, but healing. No more the numb, ashen death he had come to expect. No more the dry decay that crept day by day toward his face. The itch of renewal was worse than the pain, and Ethan found he welcomed it. He pressed his thumb to his forefinger and felt, faintly, the contact. He exhaled and set the bandages aside. He was not well. But he was not dying. Not yet. He did not know whether to thank medicine, chance, or God, but as he stared into the fire, Ethan found himself whispering a prayer, one he didn't remember learning, one not in Latin or English but in the silent language of anyone who has lived with dying. He asked not for healing, he asked for time. Chapter 24, The Weight of Dust and Stone. The mornings were quiet now, more than Ethan remembered from months past. Jerusalem's streets echoed less with panic and more with hammer and voice. The cries of market vendors rose earlier each day, joined by the rhythmic calls of laborers and the clatter of wheels bringing olive oil, wine, wool, and clay from the hills. It was not peace, not truly. But it was a lull. A moment between storms, and he meant to use it. Ethan stood on the citadel's eastern parapet, watching the stone of the Mount of Olives warm beneath the rising sun. His hand rested easily on the crenellation, ungloved. The skin beneath the bandage still itched, but it was no longer cracked or bleeding. A thin, pink layer of new flesh now stretched across what had once been raw, seeping lesions. He flexed his fingers again. No pain behind him. Boots, echoed Balian. Ethan said without turning. My lord? Balian Diabolin replied, stopping beside him. They stood in silence a moment longer. Birds wheeled overhead. Somewhere beyond the city walls, church bells rang for the feast day of St. Alexis. Ethan finally spoke. You rode back from Hebron yesterday? Balian nodded. And met with scouts along the Dead Sea Ridge. They follow the valley as far as the Wadi El Arish. Saladin is regrouping, but slower than we feared. He's keeping the bulk of his army near Cairo, still in Egypt, then for now in his lieutenants, scattered. Al-Adil is in Damietta. His brother Taki has returned to Damascus, rebuilding his hold there. The defeat at Gaza wounded them more than we guessed. They lost more grain than men. But time will heal both. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. How long? If he marches north again, it will not be before spring. Good. We need time. Balian looked at him sideways. Then let's use it well. They walked back through the upper corridor of the citadel, passing through shafts of stained light from narrow windows. Ethan slowed as they entered the chamber adjoining the war room, a space usually reserved for rest, but today emptied of furniture save for 2 chairs and a table covered in hand-drawn maps and translated scrolls on the wall. A parchment map of the kingdom had been pinned and re-inked by Anselm himself. Color dyes marked regions of strength, trade flows, and supplier routes. Ethan pointed to acre. Salt and timber reliable, Balian confirmed. The port's deep, the road's good. But the barons there bristle under your new taxes. They can bristle. They're wealthier now than they've been in years. He pointed to Jaffa next. Still fragile, yes. The canal work has helped irrigate the fields, but the eastern villages are restless. Too many Bedouin raids this past year. The garrisons there need horses and we don't have enough. Not yet, Balian agreed. But we could. Ethan leaned over the map. How? We train lighter cavalry. Mount them on the smaller Arabian stock. They're faster, cheaper to feed. Not armored like Frankish knights, but deadly with bows. We blend the styles. A hybrid corps, yes. 300 men to start. Recruited from border lords and trusted Saracen defectors. Ethan smiled faintly. You've thought this through. I've had a year watching both sides bleed. Speed wins more battles than steel. Ethan reached for a charcoal stick and marked the Jordan Valley. We need roads here, better ones. From Jerusalem to Jericho, and on to the Dead Sea garrison. If Saladin swings north next year, he'll send men through Moab again. Balian nodded. I can pull labor from Ibelin and Ramla. Ethan hesitated. And the mines, profitable, Balian said. The copper extraction in the Sinai is steady, but still vulnerable. We need a proper road to Gaza. Ethan traced a line westward on the map. Make that the first. As the sun reached noon, their conversation deepened. No longer just tactics, but foundations. We need families moving into the empty villages, Ethan said. New blood. Farmers, not warriors from where? Europe. Call for settlers through Acre and the Genoese merchants. Offer land, 3 years tax-free that will draw thieves and debtors and also bakers. Masons. Weavers. We need people willing to build. Balian folded his arms. You mean to transform the kingdom? Ethan looked at him. I mean to make it last. Even without me. Silence. Then Balian's voice dropped low. Are you dying? Ethan shook his head, slowly. Not yet. He flexed his right hand again. In fact, I'm healing. Balian looked at him, uncertain. Gerard says it's God's will. Balian frowned. Do you believe that? I don't know, Ethan said quietly. But it's happening. He pulled back his sleeve and showed the arm. Pale but firm, the skin whole. The edges were wrought once, not now faint scars. Balian took it in with silent awe. Then maybe there's still time, he said finally. Time enough, Ethan replied. To change everything they parted with firm words and firmer plans, fortified roads, a corps of light cavalry, letters to Genoa, and a call for grain storage in Acre and Jaffa. Ethan returned to his quarters late that afternoon and sat for a long time beside the brazier. The warmth soothed his joints, and for the first time in weeks, he felt no stiffness in his knees. He reached down, rubbed his calf. No swelling. No discolored blotches. Gerard had said the mold was not a cure, but something like mercy. Ethan still didn't know what to call it. It didn't matter. What mattered now was momentum. The kingdom was not yet safe. But for the first time, it had breath. It had roots, dug not just into earth and stone, but into ideas. Roads. Training. Settlement. Survival by design, not desperation. He unrolled a parchment and began sketching a new map, one that stretched not just over geography, but through time, one that might still be standing when he was not. Chapter 25, Riders and Routes. The morning drills had drawn a crowd. Not of nobles or soldiers, but townspeople, men in aprons, children in wool cloaks, a few women watching from beneath tightly wrapped veils. They gathered along the low stone wall outside Jerusalem's eastern field, murmuring to one another as they watched the test riders gallop in formation. Ethan stood beneath an olive tree, his silver mask gleaming dully in the half-light. Balian the Ibelin stood beside him, arms crossed, squinting as the fourth rider in a borrowed lamellar cuirass loosed a short, curved arrow from horseback. It struck the hanging straw man in the shoulder, not center mass, but close. Better than yesterday, Balian said, still flinching at release. Ethan replied. He pulled back rather than forward. They watched in silence as the rider wheeled around in a wide arc, his horse kicking dust, then galloped again, this time drawing from a quiver strapped under his left thigh, not across the back. The new saddle helps, Balian noted. Eastern style. High front and cantle. Holds the rider firmer. Ethan nodded. And the stirrups, lower. Wider. Easier on the knees. Less knightly, but better for long rides. Ethan smiled behind his mask. That's the idea. These weren't knights. Not in the Frankish sense. The dozen men riding today wore no chainmail, no surcoats bearing lion or cross. Their armor was a patchwork, lamellar taken from captured Saracen stores, wool vests reinforced with boiled leather. Some wore shemags to keep the dust out. They looked like mercenaries. Nomads. Border scouts. That was intentional. Give it 2 months, Ethan said. Then we double their number. With whom? Balian asked. We're short already. We recruit from the fringes. Sons of border farmers. Orphan squires. Bedouin tribesmen we've granted amnesty. Even former prisoners, if they swear loyalty and pass muster. Balian gave him a wary look. That will anger the barons, so we're losing every patrol to ambush. A gust of wind sent a spiral of dust across the training field. One of the riders sneezed and lost control of his bow, dropping it as the horse trotted back to the line. Laughter rippled through the townspeople. Ethan didn't smile. We don't need gallant. We need fast. Light. Smart mounted archers, Balian said. Like the Turks exactly. But trained under our discipline. No reckless charges. Precision. Control and loyalty. Ethan turned to him. That's the hardest part. Later that day, in the vaulted council chamber below the citadel, Ethan unrolled a different kind of map, not military. Agricultural. He had summoned Father Reinald of Bethlehem, a learned and practical priest who had cataloged village populations across Judea. Alongside him stood Sir Tancred of Ibelin, in charge of logistics, and Anselm, parchment ink still drying on his fingers. The map showed not trade routes, but parishes. Fields. Abandoned homesteads. Burned churches. Roads where pilgrims once walked, now overtaken by brush. 37 villages, Ethan said, tapping the parchment. All within 2 days of Jerusalem. Most are half empty. Some completely deserted. Father Reinald nodded. Disease. Raids. Tax flight. Many fled to Acre and north to Tyre. Ethan's eyes scanned the map. We bring them back. Or we find others. Tancred raised a brow. From where? From Europe, Ethan said. Italy. Provence. Flanders. Even the Rhineland. We speak to the merchants. The abbots. Offer land, real land, with 3 years' grace. No tithes. No forced levies. Free churches, free markets. Let them build what? Anselm asked. New villages, Ethan said simply. Stone granaries. Communal mills. Roads to Jerusalem. Trade with Acre. A generation from now, those villages feed the cities. Reinald hesitated. Will they come? The sea is long. The dangers, they will, Ethan interrupted. Because Europe has too many mouths and not enough land. We offer land. And faith. Let them believe they build God's kingdom. Tancred frowned. We'll need walls. Barracks. At least a watchtower per settlement and a chapel, Reynold added. No settler will trust soil unblessed. Ethan nodded. That's the plan. 5 settlements to start. Around Jerusalem first. Then Jaffa. Then Galilee. Anselm leaned in. And who governs them? Local reeves, Ethan replied. Elected, but with oversight from the crown. They answer to the seneschal and a local bishop. Simple laws. Fair rents. Equal protection. The room went quiet. This was something foreign. Not Roman. Not Frankish. A different model, part monastic, part modern. The kind of system built not for glory, but for resilience. They'll call it naive, Tancred said. They already do, Ethan said. But if it works, it becomes law. That evening, Ethan walked the battlements alone, accompanied only by the rustle of dry wind and the creak of old hinges on the southern tower door below. The field had emptied. The riders had dismounted and returned to the stables near Zion Gate. The straw target stood riddled with arrows. He looked down at his hand. Flexed it. The skin was firm now, pink and dry. He could almost forget what it had looked like a month ago. Gerard called it mercy. Ethan called it time, and he intended to spend it carefully. A cavalry corps trained in mobility, precision, and loyalty, not lineage. Settlements seeded not by conquest, but by promise. Roads built not for kings, but for wheat and wool and walking. It wouldn't be fast, but it would last. He turned toward the church bells echoing from the Holy Sepulchre. The kingdom could survive. Maybe, if they did this right, it could even live. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.